questions, then we need that someone repeats the question.
Okay.
Because I don't understand.
Old textile shop, in draperie, établissement Bloom, was in the 30s, 1930s, they were selling luxury textiles and some jewelry, and they needed a space to show off their textiles, and that's what they did in those different animals there, where they could really show off the material they had. It was all with natural light, and the building is a building built in 1934, whereas the building in front is a building from the 1860s, and the back of you will be able to visit also this building mid-March with ARO, which is an organization of architects, and they will talk about building, and the architect is named Monsieur Connard, so that's something like that, I remember that, modernism. So basically this is also the home of the tech communities of Brussels. The idea is to have, for all those tech communities, who are basically a group of fanatics what they know and get to know each other and create projects. So the region of Brussels needed an open space like that was easy accessible with the metro and so on. And this has become digitized. It's called digitized because you have metro either, and then you have it's about digital, but it's also about entrepreneurship because we believe that you are here in the middle of the 7 poorest communes of Belgium. There's no place where there are on average are poorer people than here, and you have to know that 3/4 of the youngsters who are without a job have not finished their studies. All school dropouts. First time I heard that, they said, "Oh, you don't understand anything about statistics. You have to say 1/4, then I understand it." I said, "No, you're not listening. It's 3/4." So 75% of the youngsters, younger than 24 years old, have not finished any kind of studies. Not even baker, not even carrosserie, nothing. Yeah. So what do they do now? They take their cloud. So they sort themselves out. Basically, that's the basic of entrepreneurship. If you can sort your own life out, you are an entrepreneur. You have no choice otherwise. So we believe that energy of finding a solution for themselves and their family is something that we are doing now in the gray zone, and that bringing them into the white zone, dans la clairière, would not be such a big effort. So if we can convince them that being in the white zone, being able to benefit from social security, being able to benefit from a whole types of trainings that are available, being able to pay your taxes if your income rises above a certain level. The taxes you only pay if your income rises above a certain level. We could advance. So we are very much into this social entrepreneurship or making them become entrepreneurs. So that's what we are doing. The building is owned by Sofina, which is a Belgian company. Basically, Sofina is an investment company managing about $7 billion of investment basically into IT. But that's not why they are sponsoring us here. They are sponsoring us because they believe that we are doing a good job in making people more digital and helping people to become entrepreneurs. So you can use this if you have good ideas, if you have an idea that you want to share, and you want to share that idea basically for free, you can use this place and we will not charge you a lot to do that, and we will provide you streaming services, we will provide you all access to amounts your event. If you want to make money with your event, which is even better, then we will charge you a bit more and we will provide you the same kind of services. So I would like to welcome you here. I hope we will have an interesting day. I really want to understand what our training is all about. I think this is really a big step into what can be done in a few years' time. So I'm looking forward to the presentation. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day.
Thank you, Philip. Okay, welcome everybody. Today, as you know, we are going to discuss about cooperation at scale, next generation collective intelligence and internet. So I have to say that this event is part of the Next Generation Internet project, which is funded by the Horizon 2020 program. My name is Loredana Bucșeneanu. I am a development director at the Digital Leadership Institute. And we have a mission of promoting and hopefully achieving inclusive digital transformation. And today I have the honor of being your master of ceremony. So I say we start the conversation. So I would like to invite for this Liliana Carrillo, who is organizing the event today. And she's also the mastermind behind the event. So please join me in welcoming Liliana and thanking her for organizing this great event. I know she put a lot of effort into it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, well, I put a lot of effort on the event or organization of the event. I made a little bit of a mistake organizing it on a Sunday morning. So my apologizes for making you wake up early and so on, but we will organize it again and it will be probably on an evening. So why I have organized this? Because I care about our data and I care about our democracy. So basically, that combination has brought me to bring you this, to offer you this conference and the speakers, to invite the speakers that we have today. So I will show you a video of what is happening with our data. It's not playing, but I will.
We know that Google is tracking us. We agree to it when we set up our phones. So we wanted to figure out what exactly Google is learning about us throughout the day. So here's what we're going to do. We have two identical phones. The only difference between these two phones is this one is in airplane mode. Both of the phones lack a SIM card, and they haven't been set up to access any Wi-Fi networks. So for all intents and purposes, these phones have no connection to a data network. We're going to keep them with us throughout the day. And while I travel around DC, we're going to figure out just what Google is finding out about me.
Our first stop, Sim's Convenience Store, just outside our Fox Bureau, for a quick coffee. From there, we took a walk to the Capitol and took a quick walk around the Senate office buildings, and then decided to hop in a car and head around town.
Hello. We're going to the Children's Hospital, please.
To run our tests, we had to do more than walk the block, so we took a tour around our nation's capital. First, due north to the Children's National Medical Center Hospital, then west to St. Albans School and the National Cathedral. Our tour around town was a 14-mile journey that lasted more than an hour. The entire time, the phones had no access to the internet.
Oh my goodness.
Not a Wi-Fi connection and not any cellular data service. It almost seemed quaint to assume that Google wouldn't even be able to collect data on me.
Let's head back to the bureau, my friend. That church is beautiful.
Google's business model is simple. Collect data on its users and then use that data to sell targeted ads. It's a business model called surveillance capitalism. But does that critical data collection work even when your phones aren't connected?
So we're back here at our Fox Bureau in DC, and we've got both of our phones exactly how we left with them. The only difference, really, I snapped a couple of bad selfies at the National Cathedral. But otherwise, they have stayed in my pocket for the entire day. So let's find out what they know. This is our man-in-the-middle device. It's basically a Wi-Fi network that these phones are going to connect to once we turn their Wi-Fi on. It's going to pass data through it on the way to Google. But on the way, we're actually going to get a copy of the same data that Google's going to get. We'll be able to decrypt it and then find out where we've been throughout the day.
Within minutes, the numbers rolled in. The phone that wasn't on airplane mode registered more than 100 locations, 130 activities, and even 152 barometric readings. As soon as it hooked up to our Wi-Fi, it transmitted 300 kilobytes of data straight to Google. The phone even logged our exact locations, tracking us all around town, the Capitol, the hospital, the school, and the cathedral.
Now you may notice what's missing here is the exact route that we took, but it got that data too. It knows when I got out of the car.
The metadata has a time log down to the very second, tracking everything. When they think that you're walking, riding, and yes, even getting out of the car.
Okay, so you're thinking, this isn't a big deal, I'll just put my phone in airplane mode. Yeah, we thought of that too. This is the other phone that we had with us that no SIM card also remained in airplane mode the entire time. Let's see what kind of data it captured.
The phone with airplane mode activated actually logged more locations and activities than the other phone, and it also transferred hundreds of kilobytes of data to Google as soon as it was activated.
The only thing that's missing from this map is our stop at the Children's Hospital, but it still knows we were there. There it is. Exiting vehicle, 100% accuracy.
Through complicated user agreements and free software, Google gets users to sign away their privacy for nothing. They're even following you in the places that most people would expect total privacy: government buildings, a children's hospital, a private school, a church. Every move you make, every step you take, Google is watching you.
Yes. So clearly, we are sharing a lot, giving a lot of data, of our private data away, without being aware of that. Like, we are not even using the telephone, to look for something. We are just having the telephone with us, and immediately we connect to a Wi-Fi. All the information is being sent, right? So this is an eye-opening, right? This is not only a challenge for our data, how we manage our data or our identity, digital identity. What kind of worries me is how this is affecting our democracy, right? We have heard about the cases of Cambridge Analytica, for example, right? So Facebook is also using the same kind of model as surveillance capitalism, which means collecting data, analyzing it for a purpose, right? And they are basically using it for manipulation of groups. Not that artificial intelligence is created for that purpose, but it's a tool. It can be used for good and for bad, right? So this is what it's happening. So now what solution could we have? Could we regulate free services, like all the services that we are getting for free? It's a question. Is there a solution over there? Could we regulate capitalism? Is there a solution over there? Could we work on more awareness, like, for example, with events like this, or with sharing with our friends what is happening with our data? our democracy? Or could we also create technology that it's actually more aligned with the protection of our democracy and the protection of us as individuals? So then there is the question. I work mostly on governance, and because of my passion for governance and this desire that I have that we work in a way that it's less hierarchical, basically moving, for example, from a country that has a centralized governance, which is a dictatorship, moving to a more representative democracy, which is the decentralized type of governance, which is, for example, Belgium. Belgium has this kind of organization at governance level, which is still centralized. The political power and the management of resources is still centralized in the hands of a few, right? So, and how to get actually to a more distributed kind of governance. So that is where you could maybe link to the TED that I gave, a TEDx talk about governance and going more into a kind of direct democracy or liquid democracy, because now with technology we can actually all be at the same time collaborating, right? So that is the beauty also of technology. It allows us to be together at the same time, 1,000 people, 5,000 people collaborating, and that was impossible before, right? So, and then from governance, so basically I'm more interested on distributed governance and how to manage this governance in a way that we become a collective and we work on our collective intelligence. And there are, like you can say it in a simple way, is co-creation. How are we going to co-create, right? And then like we are going to see today several technologies that can support us to right now to achieve this and to have more control of our data, more management of our data, which is positive, but we still need to create those applications, right? So it's emerging technologies, and it's not the only one. There are several other technologies, and little by little, with all the events that I'm organizing, I'm basically working on awareness on this. And regarding this conference, I'm very happy to welcome then Michelle. So thank you very much. That was the trigger for this event.
Thank you very much, Lily. So we have a few questions right now to reflect upon. So I wanted to see if there are any questions or anything that you would like to know and Lily can answer to. Don't be shy. Okay, so yes, please.
Could we have a microphone maybe? Yes. Thank you.
What you are doing, and organizations that strive for example, liquid democracy. For example, I'm more involved in the non-profit, and I know there when you start to talk, for example, about blockchain, it's like, oh no, it's bad and it consumes all the energy and it's criminals. And while in the scene there are a lot of very interesting initiatives that serve their own purpose. When you talk about transparency, basic democracy and so on, do you have the same issue? How do you cope with it? How are your connections with these kind of initiatives?
Well,
I know you're in Brussels, for example. There is some movement that.
I'm in Brussels. Thank you for your question. So I'm based in. Actually, I live in Ghent. I don't live in Brussels, but my activities here at Digitizer, thanks to the support of Philippe and all the team, are mostly here. Yes. To bridge the gap, we have an organization that is called the Distributed and Decentralized Governance Foundation, but it's an organization at global level. So it's not only touching Belgium, it's actually touching several locations. Like we organize meetups, we organize events to actually bring the technology to the people, right? So some organizations are at governance level are ready to actually use this kind of technology, and it's out of need. Why? Like, the evolution has brought us little by little to have organizations that have started to work many years ago with more project management that was waterfall, right? So it was everything very well planned, but then we moved more to a more resilient kind of working, and it was more agile, right? Or one of the types can be agility, which means actually that you are immediately spreading actually the tasks and visibility and working already open with some transparency, but it's a method, right? It's not a technology. So basically, all that movement of technology is like going everywhere. Like, for example, as agile practitioner, I also work on agile in education, right? So, and it brings a different kind of work, which means that people are little by little more ready to have work in flat organizations. And that is actually governance. Because traditional governance, like even we could go to peer-to-peer learning, right? In education, this is typical education, right? I'm giving you some information. But actually more peer-to-peer is, hey, we are together, you know? I'm not the expert. We are all here together, the experts, right? So then it's like little by little, all that evolution has brought us to actually need it. And there are organizations, cooperatives using it, there are non-profit organizations using, and there are different approaches. Like, for example, you can use Aragon project for governance. Like, there are different types, right? So I could talk about many projects, but we really don't have a lot of time. But I will be organizing events about all that knowledge. Like, from the governance part, it's incredible. We really have a lot of tools, and they are working tools. So yeah, so it's and basically here it's awareness. So I'm pretty sure that people will also, yeah. Okay.
We have another question over here.
I think it's a really good job what you're doing. I just have a question, because now we are seeing a lot of movement on developing applications and software where we have privacy by design. What are your thoughts on that, and how are you promoting this type of way of working in order to protect our information and for us to give us basically more control of our data that is being collected on us? Because a lot of people, like the video showed, are really not aware of the technology that sits in your phone that can track how you, when you're in and out of a building, when you're in a car, all the technology is there. How are you promoting or thinking of promoting like privacy by design in development of new applications?
Thanks for your question. So regarding privacy by design, it's actually a tricky question. Why? Because as an individual, I would like privacy, and I would like to manage my data, right? And probably many people, maybe we could ask it here, how could you raise your hand if you would like to manage your data or to have more privacy on the internet? Some people, yes, almost everyone. Now, the question is, the same data is being used for, like, if I share my data, it can also be a terrorist sharing the data, right? Let's assume I'm a good person. It can be that I'm not, right? So how does the government deal with that? Do we want fully privacy in a way that nothing is known? Or do we want some things to be known because we also want to know if there is a terrorist attack going on? So then we have this, you know, this challenge, let's say.
What I was thinking was that if I have my data, I can be in control of my data and,
Yeah.
and give access to what I want to share and not what they want from me. And I think promoting this privacy by design, where you are in control of your information, is much more is advantageous to the individuals.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. But I think we have to also move a little bit more. I'm getting signs that we are getting stuck. Okay, so how do? We go to the next speaker? Yeah, okay. So we are going to give, but we will have later time for questions and for networking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liliana. So now I'm going to invite Michel Bowens to join me. Michel is a worldwide pioneer in peer-to-peer, and he will talk today about decentralized cooperation at scale. I would like to thank Michel for being here today. It's quite exceptional, given his very tight agenda. So please join me in thanking him for being here and sharing his knowledge with us.
Thank you. So, okay, I'll start with the kind of historical anecdote, and you will wonder what this has to do with our subject, but you'll see at the end of it why this is important. So in my work, I've been very interested in transitions. So when I started to work for the P2P Foundation, I took a 2-year sabbatical, and basically, I was kind of concluding I was working for big corporations, that I was more part of the problem than part of the solution. And so I was thinking, what if I quit? What can we do? So this was a big question for me, and I thought that one of the ways of looking at what we can do today was to look at how transitions happened in the past. And as every good European, I know the history of the end of the Roman Empire, which most of you probably have heard and read. So I will take another transition that is less known, but was actually quite important. But let me give you a little historical context. You will know at the end why I'm telling this story. So 5th century, end of the Roman Empire. But actually, not really. It's Rome that falls, but if you would travel around Gaul, for example, you'd still see Roman soldiers. And so basically what happened is that the political power of the center collapsed, but the systems still, were there for quite a while. And so quite a few historians say that the real turning point was in the 8th century, when the Muslims invaded the Mediterranean area, and so Europe lost its access to basically commerce and trade. And that's when the real collapse happened. So you have Charlemagne, who wants to recreate the Roman Empire. It doesn't really work. He gives it to his 3 sons. Doesn't really work. And so that's why we have the period of castleization. It's a kind of peer-to-peer feudalism or proto-feudalism. And so what happens is basically a total chaos. So the people with arms, they steal the gold from the churches, they rape the women. I mean, nobody's safe. And so in 975, the monks of Cluny, which is one of the Benedictine order and very powerful, with the people, they start a revolution. It's called the Peace of God movement. And basically you have the Virgin Mary up front, the monks up front, the people in the back, and they start confronting the proto-feudals with their sins. And at that time, people were taking that very seriously. And so in a matter of 50 years, everything changes. So this charter, it's called the Peace of God Charter, is signed in more than 600 different cities, in Belgium, in the north of France, in the south of France, the north of Italy. So this kind of area. And so three things happen, three agreements: make love, not war. That's the first one. So the feudals promise to marry each other instead of fighting all the time. The second thing is primogeniture. The oldest son gets everything, so it pacifies the family. You don't have to fight for your inheritance inside the family. And the third one is that the people no longer have access to meat. So it's the first basically enclosure of the commons is that the poor people, you know, they can no longer hunt for meat. So this pacifies the situation. After that, you get 3 centuries of very, very high growth, doubling of the Western Europe of the European population, tripling of the Western European population. All the cities come back, and the farmers become much more productive because they can have meat. So it's all this surplus of grains that actually creates, you know, the conditions for the growth. So here is my point. How did it happen? So as the productivity rose in the countryside, more and more people were not needed, and they started moving away. They started fleeing. And if you had 1 year of freedom, the Lord could not take you back. So this is the people came to the cities, and what did they do? Well, they created commons, right? Well, a commons is a shared resource that is managed by a group of people, a group of stakeholders, according to their own rules and norms. And so the basis of the medieval prosperity, I should tell you, in the 13th century, people had a 5-day working week, the day of the Lord and the day of the family on Monday, Blue Monday. The women were taller than today, so you can see that in the cemeteries. And you probably know about the troubadours and all that stuff. So it was there was a lot of talk about gender equality at the time as well. So this was a thriving period. But it's kind of the guilds, these common resources of workers, right? Where a master could only have 7 fellows. Anti-oligarchic rule that created this whole ethical market situation that we know in the early Middle Ages. So I'm just telling you that story because just to show societies do change, right? It's not that we think we're eternal, and actually we're not. Every civilization to date has collapsed. And this is a very important lesson. Every class society has collapsed. And the reason is very simple. It's like the predator-prey dynamic. You have a productive class, you have a managerial class. Gazelles and tigers. If the tigers start eating too much, at some point the gazelles die out, and then the tigers die out, right? So this dynamic is a study called HANDY, Human and Nature Dynamics, shows that every single civilization has collapsed in that way. But always at a local level, of course. And this is different. Today we have a global crisis. So at the local level, every time, and this is kind of a pulsation theory of world history, when class societies collapse, the commons come back. This is every time. You can see this in 12th century Japan, 15th century China, 5th century Europe, 10th century Europe. And this is what we're seeing today. So let me give you a second pulsation. This comes from Karl Polanyi, who wrote a fantastic book called The Great Transformation. It's a history of capitalism, 1785 to 1945. And he sees the same pulsation within capitalism. So you have basically these cycles of about 60 years, 30 years of high productive growth is good for labor, reforms, less work, more wages, etc. But then capital is frustrated. After 30 years, they're not making enough money anymore, so they do a counter-revolution. And this ushers in the Lib period. So you have the Lab period and the Lib period. The Lab period always ends with a supply crisis. Capital is not making enough profit, they go on strike. 1970s. Lib periods end with a demand crisis. They're making lots of money, but we are not. And so we can't buy their stuff, and we enter into crisis as well. So that was 2008. And so when we have this kind of crisis, the commons come back. So we have an exponential rise in open source code. We have an exponential rise in urban commons. I did a study in Ghent very quickly. There were 50 in 2008 and 500 in 2016. So a tenfold increase in urban commons. It means that today, if you look at European cities at least, and And actually, I did a study with Christian Iannone of LabGov. We had 1,000 cases and 500 in the Global South. This is also happening in the Global South. So we are in a period of recommodification of our societies, right? And so to think of it, why this is important, why we stay small even as we are changing, so you should see as a society as a complex adaptive system. So it changes to what we call punctuated equilibrium. Not through smart reforms and people in power who say, oh, we should do it better. Basically what you have is when a society reaches systemic crisis, all the binds that tie us start unraveling, right? So all the old institutions start slowly unraveling. At the same time, the people who are either cast out or don't want to stay, we have both, they start looking for solutions that are different from the system in crisis. So the logic of the innovations is different from the logic of the system in crisis. And these are the seed forms, the receptacles that grow in periods of unraveling. And I think this is exactly what we're doing now. So very important. If we look at the urban commons, we see that some people, 2-3% maybe of the population, is already in transition. They are reorganizing food supplies, they're reorganizing energy production, they are doing shared mobility, shared habitat, etc., etc. This is growing pretty much everywhere. So let me hopefully this will work. So today my argument is we are in a similar period of a growing recommodification of our society towards a new model. And so let me kind of just quickly explain how that works. So basically what I'm trying to say is that every systemic transition is a new value regime. Yeah, so for example, think about the Roman Empire. Slaves do the work. Work is bad. To be a good person, you don't have to work. You have to manage things. You have to think about philosophy, etc., etc. When the Christians come, the post-Roman system, work is good. So you have a complete value change. What is considered value creation has completely changed over in these two systems. And this is what we see happening today in the re-emerging, what I call the commons economy. Just to tell you one statistic, there was a study in 2011. The economy in the US that depends on shared knowledge resources was then already 1/6 of GDP and mobilizing 17 million people. Yeah, this was in 2011, so probably statistics were from 2008 or something. I haven't seen any recent study. So how does it work? The value regime in the commons is not a market value regime. So we believe that value comes from the market. So something has to be scarce, a commodity, creates a tension between supply and demand. And so we invest in natural resources and labor and try to get surplus out of that. And this is not how it works in the commons. In the commons is a contributory regime. We create value through contribution. How does Linux grow? Through the contributions of all the free software developers in the world, whether they're paid or not paid. So the fact that they are commodity labor or not doesn't matter. It matters, but it's not enough to explain what happens in, let's say, the Linux economy, where 25% of people work for free. Why? Because they can, because they want to. They need to do something about Linux that works for them better, and so they just do it because they can, right? So this is a quarter of the value creation is completely outside of the commodity logic. Now, if you do this, and I'll give you an example to show you how this works. So I have a collaborative with, let's say, 20 translators, and we want to do something good for the world. So half of our time, we do it for free. And then we raise our reputation. We become known as really good translators. What's going to happen is that market players are going to ask 2 of us to translate a book. So you see, the market is going to value 2 out of 20 people, even though the whole ecosystem has been created by 20 people, right? So this is why people in the commoners look for generative market rules and arrangements. They look, for example, so this is something I call, I'll quickly explain the strategy here because it's a strategy of scaling as well. So investment is looking for capital to create more capital and profit, etc., etc. Transvestment is looking from value in one value regime to fund another, right? So you could say capitalism is the privatization of the commons, the enclosure of the commons, and in creating the commons economy is about communifying capital. It's taking capital and changing it into commons. So all the money that goes into Linux, let's say, is partly, of course, feeding all the companies that work with it, but it's also feeding the Linux commons, right? So it's already partially a transvestment strategy there. But I want to give you a concrete example. Lumio, open source decision-making tool that many people are using. It's a coalition of 40 social entrepreneurs. So what they did is they created a wall between the capital and the stewardship-based organization model. So basically, the founders of these companies, which are not-for-profit, protect themselves from the power of the investors. And so they actually gave them money, so 5% a year, which in these days of negative interest is not bad. But after 10 years, they thank them, and then you have Lumio, right? So the capital has actually created a common resource. A quick word about the first circle there. If you look at open source communities and urban commons, you will see that they actually do have organizations behind them. You just gave a name of what's behind Holochain, same thing. So these are new type of organizations. So if you think about capital, you think about scarcity. If you think about the commons, you think about abundance. So what's the difference? I'm Médecins Sans Frontières. I know there's health issues in war zones. I'm going to collect resources and direct them to solve that problem. But you can also say, like Ushashadi and these types of organizations in the aid world, you could say, well, we know there are big problems, but we also know there's a lot of people who want to help solving them. So we create a platform where people can come in and out and solve these issues collectively. So this management and creation of these infrastructures of collaboration is actually what they do, right? So I call them for benefit associations. And they're usually not for profit. Again, not for profit doesn't mean non-profit. You have profit, non-profit, and you have not for profit, which means that you use the resources, eventually even the profit, in order to sustain a certain societal goal. All right, so very quickly, this is the world we are in today. In classic capitalism, you have the struggle between capital and labor. In commons-based capitalism, which is what we have now. So if you think about all the new companies that we were talking about, Facebook, Google, Uber, what are they? They don't make money with workers. They make money by enabling us to do peer-to-peer exchanges and sharing. Yeah? So they're commons extractive companies. They directly exploit human cooperation. So it's a paradox. Historical capitalism was against the commons. They closed them down. The new capitalism, I call it Proudhonian capitalism, because Proudhon thought the surplus came through cooperation. They directly exploit our peer-to-peer exchanges. So we have 4 forms competing for dominance. The one that we discussed, that Liliana discussed, which is what I call netarchical capitalism. So you allow peer-to-peer at the edges, but everything inside is centralized and proprietary. Then you have the blockchain model, distributed capitalism. I think it's is interesting. It has deep flaws, but also quite interesting. So basically, it's the monopoly game, right? So you start equal, but we all know what happens when you start equal in monopoly. It always ends with an oligarchy. All the protocols in the blockchain are oligarchic protocols. They're all designed to concentrate capital in the end. So they're actually even more unequal than the first model. But they have advantages. One is they're open source. They have a very large place for community. But most importantly, they are open collaborative systems. So they are extractive to the outside, but internally they're very interesting. And for me, they are a key to transition, because as long as we stay in a purely competitive system, we cannot solve our systemic crisis. So we have to move to situations where I can see what you are doing, so if you don't sell shoes, I can adapt my behavior, right? So what open source has brought to the world is called stigmergy, is free mutual coordination through signaling. it's like in a football game, right? You have 11 players here, 11 players on the other side. Everybody sees the whole game. And so in real time, you adapt your behavior. So this is the standard in free software cooperation. But in order to do this in production, real material production, we need accounting. And this is why blockchain is a revolution. So we have the Internet of Communication, and now we have the Internet of Transactions, right? A transaction is what is between our knowledge, our human consciousness, and the material world. Every transaction represents a real change in the material world. So so distributed ledgers, shared ledgers is the technology we're going to need to transition, but we need to adapt it. And I think that's what Holochain is doing. So urban commons are below, and then we have the global commons. So I don't have time to discuss everything now, but so just to say what we are doing in the P2P Foundation and other similar organizations, we're working on this, right? So we don't like the proprietary platforms. Well, we create cooperative platforms. I'm part of Smart.coop. I give 2% of my wage to a mutual guarantee fund, so I can be paid within 7 days instead of within 3 months. After 6 months, we actually pay ourselves our own wage. We get taxed. We talked about the gray zone. You talked about the gray zone and the white zone. So Smart is typically the organization which puts us from the gray zone in the white zone. And we get full support of the social state. And we have 20,000 cooperative members. What's the advantage? All the surplus goes back into the ecosystem. There's no private shareholder punctuating the surplus. Cosmolocal co-ops, this is basically the idea today that, so we call it cosmolocal production. As you probably know, we spend 3 times more matter and energy on transporting stuff than on making stuff. So in other words, the neoliberal globalization model is condemned in the next decades. But the answer of national protectionism I don't find very appealing because it's xenophobic, etc., etc. So why not keep the best of both worlds, which is saying everything that's light is global and shared, and everything that's heavy is localized to the degree that it makes sense. So we call that the subsidiarity of material production. And we organize ourselves as co-ops and other for-benefit modes of organization. On top of it, this is really interesting. I think because it tells you something about global governance. So when you read Polanyi, he describes this double movement, lib-lab, right? And so what he says is at the end of the crisis, you always have either capital or labor mobilizing and putting pressure on the state to change the market regime, right? So so basically the nation, the people, the community of people in a country, left or right, start mobilizing and putting pressure to re-embed the market in societal logics, or the opposite, depending on the phase we're in. And the problem is, of course, this is no longer working, right? So the problem today is that we have state and nation, but capital is already transnational. So no matter how much pressure we put at the local level, at the national level, it's not enough. We can't really change. And look at what happened with all left-wing governments in the last 10, 15 years, right? It doesn't work. They can't do it. So what do we do? Well, one of the things we can do is to transnationalize ourselves, right? In other words, civil society organizations don't need to wait for the nation state to change. We can change transnationally, translocally. So Enzio Manzini talks about SLOC, small, local, open and connected, which we all are today. But I think we need to go further. We really need to create transnational power. And think about my anecdote. So now it's starting to make sense, my anecdote. What kind of world did we create after the revolution of 1975? We created a distributed world. The cities were self-governing. The guilds were self-governing. So for 200-300 years, we had cities where actually the workers through the guilds were managing their own affairs, right? Didn't last. It collapsed in the 14th century. But for 3 centuries, it worked. Just as Athenian democracy, and the Indian civilization with the Jesuits in Paraguay. 3 centuries is a pretty good deal, I think. You know, if we can last 3 centuries with something that works better, I think we can be happy. But here is just what I wanted to say about protocol co-ops. Okay, so Uber and Airbnb, for example, create enormous amount of negative externalities. Basically, with Uber, you can't live from it. So if you're a student, it's fine, but if you want to live from Uber, I think it's about 9 months. You stay 9 months with Uber before you discover that it's not working, right? It's impoverishing. It is simply impoverishing the people who work for them. Airbnb creates it's like a nuclear bomb, right? It's like an H-bomb. No, not the H-bomb. The ones that destroy people but not buildings. What's that? It's not the neutron bomb. Airbnb is a neutron bomb, right? You put it somewhere in the middle of the city, and in Paris already 15% of the population had to leave. Yeah, same is happening here in Brussels. Around the Grand Place, everybody's leaving because you can make more money Airbnb than renting, and so all these people have to leave the city. So it kills people, but it keeps the buildings. It's a neutron bomb. So if you want to avoid this, 40 cities have already created some kind of league, you know, to regulate those players. But that's not enough. We could do more, and this is the model I propose, which is here, I think, hopefully, there, is why don't cities get together, leagues of cities like in the Middle Ages, together with Ethical Finance, Newbie, it's going to be available soon in Belgium, and big co-op, solidarity economy players, and create the infrastructural software that we need to mutualize provisioning systems in cities. So in other words, Fairbnb, or you know, things of that nature, right? So in this case, what I'm saying is that we can use the cities as a governance form, right? It doesn't have to be the nation state. We can basically, in a situation where the nation state is paralyzed or doing bad things, we can actually go around the nation state and use cities to already organize transnationally. And this is pretty much a situation that existed from the 11th to the 14th century, right? Where nobody really had all the power. Yes, you had a church, but the church didn't have troops, or only very little. And all the congregations were fighting each other, and the Pope was fighting the congregations were fighting each other. So this was a kind of distributed system that existed there, and I think this is, to be honest, this is, I think, where we're going. A kind of translocal, transnational, unstable system with more and more, you know, kind of fragmentation of power. But this is one of the things we can do, is we can mutualize production of these infrastructure by using, you know, cities, coalitions of cities as the governance layer. And so if we think about scaling, there's a few things to say about it. There's 3 ways to scale: through the state, through capital, and directly through the commons, and combinations thereof. So let me give you an example why you shouldn't dismiss the state. So about 25 years ago in Germany, there was one village that said, you know, energy is not working, fossil fuels is not working, atomic energy is not working. It's not good for us. So they wanted to create a local co-op. It took them 7 years of fighting just to get the right to do it, right? And so if you like me and you like commons, you have to know that Ostrom, who studied the commons and you know, all the traditional commons, and she was very clear of it. Commons only survive when they are recognized by public authorities, because otherwise the police can come tomorrow and close you down. This is the reality. So you can be an anarchist if you like, but for these things to work, at the very least you need recognition. But so let's continue the story about the Energiewende. So what happened was, once they got the right to do it, it started spreading. But how much did it spread? Only 2 or 3% of the population, right? It took Fukushima, the Greens in the government, the feed-in tariff, in other words, a generative market regulation, and then the alternatives became the norm. And this is how change happens all the time. If you want to scale, this is how it happens. Think about Roosevelt, 1929, big crisis, Herbert Hoover, neoliberal, avant la lettre, they weren't called that way. He says the market will solve everything. It didn't. So Roosevelt came to power, and what did he do? He copied what the people were already doing. The Beveridge social security system was a social security system in some place in Wales. He said, oh, that's working, we'll make it the norm. So this is very important, that the state is an agent of scaling. But as I say, local states, local cities can be also the agents of that scaling. Capital, of course, is also a way of scaling, but the problem with capital, of course, is they will eat your commons, or they will exploit it or extract from it. So this is where you have to really think about what I call reverse cooptation. And I have a book about it, so if you're interested. And so, for example, how do we do transvestment? How do we use capital and commodify capital? I'm in favor, and we had a discussion before we started, not so much copyleft, and I'll tell you why, in a bit of a provocative way. The more communistic your license, the more capitalistic your practice. If you allow everybody to share, big companies dominate your ecosystem. So we are for copy fair. And copy fair splits knowledge from commercialization. So we say everybody can use the knowledge because it's unethical to not share solutions for the global crisis. But if you want to make money out of our work, you have to somehow to reciprocate. So very simple. You can use 2 Creative Commons licenses. One is the non-commercial for everyone. So you can use the knowledge, but you can't make business with it. And you give the commercial license to the members of the consortium. So that we call this copy fair. There's another way that I just learned about. So a lot of free software people who don't want this to happen, what happened with Linux and Drupal and everything, are now staying very small, right? So what they're doing is they don't tell anybody what they're doing. And so they spread slowly and virally, and because the growth is organic, they don't need capital. So that's another way to do it. But the big question will be, is, how do you constrain capital so that it works for the commons? And of course, the third way is through civil society organization at a translocal and transnational scale, which is what the Holochain is doing. And I actually have a little slide here. Let me see. Yeah, that's the one, sorry. So basically what I think we should be doing, and it's happening a bit, is so right now we have a lot of people working on more fair economies. We have a lot of people working on sharing knowledge. We have a lot of people working on sustainability, but they're not working together. Big fragmentation of the field. So the first thing we need to do is build bridges between those worlds. But I also think we should be basically organizing at the local level. So Assembly of the Commons, all the people in a city that are producing, maintaining, protecting commons, and the Chamber of the Commons, all the people who have a generative economic activity which helps the commoners live. There is a good book about this. And then I'll end, sorry, because I tend to talk a lot, so I'll end with this about blockchain and holochain. But there is a very good book about it. It's called, it's a very bad title, Change Makers. I think there must be 20 with that title. But the subtitle says The Industrious Future of the Digital Economy. And let me briefly tell you what that book said, because it's really very good. It's from Adam Arvidsson. It's a friend of mine. He's in Naples. And so in times when capital is in crisis, so capital is today almost wholly speculative. That's where the money goes. That means that if you want to change, you have to be not industrial, but industrious. Capital poor, labor incentives. So if you talk about the gray zone, Philip, this is what it is. This is economy which is labor intensive and capital poor. And this is happening everywhere. The middle class in Europe and the United States is becoming precarious. The fastest growing impoverished group, so the fastest impoverishing group of people in the West are the freelancers. Only 20% of us will make it with a halfway decent pension. 80% are poor. Now, they may not feel it because they now stay until they're 42 with their parents, which is the average in Italy. So people stay until they're 42 with their parents. My daughter does the same. She's not earning enough. So here's her choice. Either I rent and I'm poor, or I stay with mama, and I can go on holiday, I can buy CDs. Oh, no, they don't do that anymore. But anyway, you see what I mean. So this is the reality for a lot of young people today. And so we're in crisis. We don't feel it that much because we have so much fat in our society. But this is happening. Okay, so I was starting to explain to you this, so how we try to change the models that we don't like. And this is how it would be applied to the blockchain and why I think the holochain is a good idea. So if you look at the blockchain, it's designed by people who believe in Austrian economics, mostly. So the most liberal, libertarian form of liberal economics. So all the principles in the blockchain and the Bitcoin are this kind of economy. So it's a monopoly economy. Everybody is free at the start and equal, but it ends with one person having everything. And so if you see, for example, all the monies in blockchain are commodity currencies, supply and demand. But we can do different things. For example, we could have intelligent, asset-based currencies like Solar Coin, right? This represents a real wealth, which is the production of renewable energy. Or we could do Fish Coin. Fish Coin is a money which presents the available stocks of fish, so we don't overfish. So we now have a technology that would allow us to design currencies that are intelligent and generative. I'll give you one very small example here in Belgium, in Bonheiden. I'm not even sure where that is. But they have the mobility ducaten. So ducats is an old currency in Belgium from way back, from the Duke, right? And so the problem is everybody sends their kids to school with a car, which is very bad for traffic and air pollution, etc., etc. And why not support young people to go with a bike? And they get paid for it because they diminish the pollution, they diminish the traffic, they contribute to their health, so they diminish the hospital bills in the future, etc., etc., etc. This is worth something. And so they went from 20% to 65%, and this money can be used in recyclerie and you know, all the alternative economy. So to create what I call circular finance. And I'll end with this. But have a look at this, because this is very important. So almost every principle of the blockchain is based on an extractive mindset, and we can change it. We can use generative values and design blockchains, or I would call it holochains, that actually work for everyone. Anyway, so we can design blockchain, post-blockchain type, distributed ledgers, shared ledgers, and let me tell you why this is important, and then I'm finishing up. Okay. Okay, I can go on forever. Believe me, I did this for 2 days once. So, are you ready? It's a Fidel Castro type. Okay, so here's how things could work. And I think this would be a big advantage. So here's the problem. Under capitalism, we think value comes from the market. So in other words, we have to be extractive of people and natural resources. Then we make money. Then we tax, and then we can redistribute and repair the damage. There is no direct taking into account of this. Yes, this. Right, which is all the positive and negative externalities that we produce during our commercial activities. There was a study that took the CAC 40 in France, the top 40 companies, and asked the question, which one of them would be profitable if they would take care of their negative externalities? You can guess how many. 0, right? So we have a system which is unsustainable in its very DNA. We can only make money through destruction. So if you're a farmer and you destroy your land year after year by using toxic chemicals, you get 100 times more subsidies than a farmer that regenerates its soil year after year. This is the reality, and this is why we're not scaling, by the way, right? We're not scaling because generative activities are not funded. And so you have one type, the majority of companies which are destroying the natural resources and get rewarded for it. And then you have companies, social entrepreneurs, and many others who say, no, we'll take it on us to have an economic activity which doesn't destroy the planet. And so it's more expensive, and so you're less competitive in that mainstream world. This is why we're not scaling. It's not because they're not good. So if you actually look at externalities, and I'll give you an example from Ghent, and this is where you really have to look at the governance model. So there is a study showing that car sharing doesn't work. Yeah, but they look at Uber and they look at Cambio and then they say car sharing doesn't work. But I tell you one that works, which is Dégage in Ghent, 130 cars for 1,300 people, right? So here's the rule: a car stays 5% is used only 5% of the time, and it's going down. So we're losing even less than 5% now, because people have 2 cars and 3 cars. So the amount of time they use their cars is even less than a lot of people have 2 or 3 cars just because maybe one person wants to use it in the weekend, right? So think about it, all that matter and energy that is used for something that stays in the garage almost the whole week. So if you have 10% of cars for a group of people, that's double the buffer. So that means that Dégage can guarantee its members you will always have a car. If you want a car, there'll be a car for you. So 130 cars instead of 1,000 cars, yeah, or 2,000 cars. So basically, it's every shared car replaces 9 to 13 private cars. This has been studied in similar projects. I don't think it has been studied in Ghent. So this is the advantage of mutualization, right? So think about it. You're a monk. The Roman Empire is collapsing. So you have 2 choices. Or you're not a monk yet. You're a citizen. Yeah, you're a citizen. Even the rich. So there was an epidemic of giving to the church at the end of the Roman Empire, because the ruling class couldn't manage the funding of the state. So where do you go? Well, I'll go in a monastery. I'll be safe there. And so you give a gift and they'll treat you well. And that was it. So this happened on a massive scale. But if you're poor, you had a choice. Either you go and find a lord protector. So the smart Roman elite was already gone back to the countryside and managing their land. And so they said, well, we'll protect you. You work for free, but we'll protect you. So that was the serfdom solution. Or you could go to a monastery. So in a monastery, this is a funny anecdote. So you had to promise obedience, no sex. And what was the third one? Poverty, right? And did you notice how rich the monasteries are? It's very simple, because they are commons. All the surplus is reinvested. There's no leakage, right? So they get 10% from the people, and then they work, because Christians have to work, right? And let me tell you this anecdote, since I have the time. So this is about the Sister Censiers. So you have first the Benedictines, and they say, we have to work and pray, but they're clever, they make other people work for them. Okay, so Saint Bernard comes and says, this is wrong, these are the synagogues of Satan. We have to work. So he invents this new brotherhood. And here is the reasoning, which I think is amazing. He says, okay, since we owe everything to God, we have to pray as much as we can. But since we have to work efficiently so that we can pray a lot. So in other words, he's the inventor of productivity, and these were prayer maximizing enterprises. Anyway, but so basically after 100 years, a monastery is rich because it's a commons that reinvests everything in the ecosystem. And so there's this one monk from Cluny who said, I vote obedience, and here I am leading thousands of men. I signed up for poverty, and here I'm surrounded by all that gold, and I promise not to have sex, but I don't want to talk about that one. Anyway, so this is a real anecdote. Now I lost my thread. But anyway, so I think I'll conclude by, okay, no, I know what I wanted to say. So imagine this. So today everything is competitive. So you want to do something good, even like social impact bonds, what's going to happen? You compete on being efficient in one single thing. So you get the contract by externalizing anyway. So even the impact economy, by using this kind of competitive dynamic, we're always pushing externalizations. And of course what happens is that 100 people, 100 entities will compete to get the money, only one gets it, and everything is, all that knowledge is wasted. So when I do the following, we'll have a distributed ledger, a public distributed ledger. And we say, okay, we have to decarbonize. We are willing to put money and value in this because this is for the survival of humankind. So we have funding for decarbonization. So why don't we let everyone in society prove that they do decarbonization? So for example, if you're a farmer and you do biochar, we can calculate, for every 100 kilo of biochar, how much you have decarbonized. This is all technically possible. So in this case, you would have a system that allows every citizen, every co-op, every company to actually, do generative activities, and you create a circular finance system, right? So give you another example of this. Terre des Liens is a pretty big community land trust movement in France. They have like 80 million euro capital. And so they buy up land, which is too expensive, right? So seriously, millions of people today want to go back to the countryside. It's called the neo-rural movement. They don't have money. You don't have the money to buy the land, right? So CLT buys the land and gives it at a very cheap rent to eco-farmers with un bail écologique, an ecological contract, right? So they've already proven that the more that they do this, so the more farmers of that type you have in a province, the less the government has to spend on depollution. We were talking about hundreds of millions of euros in savings. So why not do the same as IBM did with Linux, which is, we'll get into Linux, we save 90% of our costs, internal costs, and every year we'll spend 10% of the savings into Linux, right? So this is so capitalism already does that. So we'll just do the same at the level of the state, and we say, we 30% of what we save that we were spending, but we're not spending thanks to you, and we create a circular finance, a virtuous feedback loop. Anyway, so I'm going to stop here, but there's a lot of thinking, a lot of innovation in the field of the commons today that you don't find in the startup world, where there's a lot of fake innovation and fake disruption. So I hope at the very least that you'll open your eyes to a lot of these things that are happening under the ground, under the radar, and you don't see it because there's weak signals, as we call them. But there's a lot of them, right? Think about permaculture, and I'll stop here. You can say, okay, this is marginal, permaculture. But you know how many thousands of projects there are in the world, right? So it's not as marginal as you think. It depends on where you're looking, right? You should say, okay, there's 5 projects in Ghent, that's not a lot. But what if every city has 5? Then suddenly you see that we actually are changing the world because we're creating the seed forms, the receptacles of the world of the future. And I'll finish with this. This is Peter Pogani, is my latest discovery, Hungarian, dead. And he has this theory of pulsation, which I think is very convincing, but it's a bit harsh for our own future. He says, complex adaptive systems change to punctuated equilibrium, right? So in other words, you have a stable system, you have a chaotic transition, and you have a new stable system. And so he writes, he starts with the mercantile period, so before the French Revolution, stable system. It ends with the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. Europe is in flames. That gives you the Smithian capitalist system. Freedom for the entrepreneurs, but the full dominion of capital over labor. If you're a worker in 1850, you die when you're 35, right? You actually lost life expectancy. This ends 1914, 1945. In other words, fascism and communism propose an alternative to the parliamentary capitalist system. It fails but Europe is in flames and the world is in flames. And it gives us the Rooseveltian New Deal, Trente Glorieuses, right? A social compact between capital and labor. Not in the whole world, but at least in the northern part of the world. And this is now breaking down. And so here is what he says, and I think he's completely right. What we need to do now is a compact with nature. Right? So, yes, we are disintegrating very fast at this right now. I don't know if you follow the news. There's millions of people on the streets in the world in like 15 places at the same time. But we also see and can expect that there is another stable system at the other side of it, right? And the cynic would say the light at the end of the tunnel may be another incoming train, but let's hope let's hope it's not that. So I think in the end, you know, we have to be prepared for a pretty tough time, and we are still in the privileged parts of the world. But a pretty tough time. But what we need to do now is work on the future and work on the seed forms that are going to give us a sustainable economy and society. Thank you.
Thank you, Michel. I know that we are running a little bit behind schedule, but I would love to take advantage of the fact that you're here and maybe take a couple of questions, which I would like to have them short. So, any questions? Yes, Philip.
Yeah, I have a question, Michel. You know what we're doing here? We are working on sharing knowledge, pushing people to do to work better and to do it in a smarter way. Your strategy, not your strategy, what you said here is very broad and it's like a big oceans of alternatives. What are for you the three lowest hanging fruits that we could take to push a knowledge sharing community like ours forward?
Yes, it's you know, I don't know all the context here, but first of all, I think you use the word that I like a lot, low-hanging fruit, because you know we are weak at this stage, in a way, because you know there's only a few % of population engaged in this, and if you're weak, struggle, you know. Struggling against an enemy that can defeat you is not a good idea. So you have to start by low-hanging fruit and consolidating your existence. I would say, and I don't practice it myself, but luckily I have a Thai wife, and so I'm good. When I don't have money, I get everything I need from my family. Anyway, so the family is actually a commons in Thailand still, at least in the north. But what I want to say is that I think today you really have to start thinking about very concrete things, and that is, where is my food going to come from? Where is my energy going to come from? So I think this is an era where we have to start thinking, you know, not like this is the situation is going to last forever, but this is a situation that is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. So how do we help people? And mutualizing and commoning is a really good solution. Also psychologically. You know, just give you an example because I have this with my Thai wife all the time. You know, it's one of the cultural differences. So if you have a commons, you really have a view of abundance of life, right? So if you don't have enough apples, your uncle will have apples. Same, if you don't know something and you're in a community, somebody else will know what you need to know. So that gives you a kind of profound feeling of, I'm a lot safer than I thought I was, right? If you're in a purely competitive mindset, if I don't have it, I'm screwed. And so this is anxiety, and I'm pretty I'm a pretty anxious person myself. So, and so I get hyper anxious because I feel my wife is not anxious enough. You see what I'm saying, right? Anyway, but so the feeling that she has, because she has this large extended family which is supporting her, is you know, why do you worry about it? You know, this is going to be fine in the end, right? So how do you create that feeling, right? Because this is what is happening now, both on the left and the right, by the way. So we all thinking, oh, the state, the social state, the pensions, I'm not sure I'm going to have it when I'm older, right? So you're thinking, is the state still going to exist? Are they going to go bankrupt with our pension fund? So you have all these fears. So what do? Well, then you regress. So how am I going to be safe? And on the right is going to be ethno-nationalists. You know, the real Belgians, the real French, you know. So you go back to your ethnic or religious or state identity and you push other people out. But on the left, it's with identity politics, pretty similar. You know, it's gender and other criteria. But so people are going back to their, and this is not healthy because this leads to a total fragmentation of society. So how do we create generative solutions where people feel safe? So that's what I would do. I would look at not just, you know, I don't know what you do exactly, but, you know, incubating but also looking at, you know, are there material resources, material things that we can help them with that create this feeling of, you know, security.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes.
Hold on.
Just a second. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow from the beginning, so I just dropped in. So I feel you speak a lot about economics. So I'm coming from I'm a social entrepreneur
Just
myself.
keep your mic closer to your mouth.
So I have to talk like this, sorry. You see, I'm not a speaker. I'm a social entrepreneur myself. I know where you're coming from. My big question about, if you're talking about disruptive technology and peer-to-peer, for me, there are a couple of things which stand out. Do we go to a kind of commons? Yes, but in economics, rational economics, we are maximizing human beings, meaning we're not altruistic. That means we have to choose either a social side or an ecological side to find a purpose to fight for this. How would you, in this kind of a system, if we talk about holochain, how would you be able to create that narrative? Because as a social entrepreneur for 20 years, what I feel is that we stick quite on the seeding. Scalable, yes, is an issue. And my question is how, I do not really believe at this point that you can scale without the state. So for me, it would be to convince the state that is the only way forward. Now, that is another part. And maybe because of your last example, you said something, how do we create this kind of society? Would you say that, for example, in Holland, where they went to the participatiemaatschappij, if that would be, for example, a step forward, that Holland maybe is already a step ahead of us? I don't know. It's a big question. I don't know.
Okay. So the first thing is I don't believe that the definition of economics of human beings is correct. So I believe we are partially selfish, partially altruistic. And so the ideal is to find convergence, right? Is to find activities that make you happy while at the same time you're making something else better. And the problem with our system is that it only looks at that one side. It relentlessly promotes the competitiveness, right? So you look at education. Education used to be the idea is to form a human being so that he can participate in society. That was what classic education is about. Now you read what the Flemish government is writing about education. It's an investment in your future. You make a loan, you develop your skills, and then you're going to sell your skills on them. So there's no more talk about education being anything else than investing in the company of me. So this is not reality. This is a part of reality. And so the problem is that all our incentives are based on that fiction and force us to be in that position. And so it's very hard to do the other step because it means that all the incentives are not there. You have to make them yourself. And this is the reality. And this is why, the first people who do these alternatives are people who are willing to take the risk, and they often pay a price. Now, to mitigate that statement, I would say that most of these people in that sphere learn to look at capital in a different way. So you look at money, you look at love, you look at relationships, you look at truth, you look at, and so basically you build up your life and your wealth in a different way, right? That maybe I have a bit less money, but I have a lot more friends, for example. So these kinds of reasonings. I agree with you about the state being a very efficient scaling mechanism. The problem is, and I speak from experience, is that both left and right today are entirely in the old paradigm. So it's basically, if you're on the left, you want to redistribute more, right? And they're basically managing the decline. And if you're on the right, you don't care, and it's good the way it is. The best will drive up. So, but they both believe in the same. They both believe that value comes from the market. Markets can be taxed, high or low. And so that's the problem. The problem is that how do you find players within institutions that actually have a bit of an idea that maybe there's another reasoning that is possible. Now, these people are coming online slowly but surely. I have a lot of talks with the Ecolo, for example. The Flemish don't understand a word of what I'm saying, Groen. But Ecolo, yes. So you have to find the interstitial spaces. Now you look at Bologna, at Italy, which I think is a really good example. So they had a change in the constitution about 15 years ago, I think, where they introduced subsidiarity as a principle in the constitution. Then had a water referendum, so Berlusconi wanted to privatize all the water, and 97% of Italians said no. And this put the commons on the agenda. And then Bologna, based on that constitutional principle, created a regulation that allows people to take care of a resource. So in other words, groups of people in Italy today have the legal right to say, we want to take care of that resource because the state or the market doesn't take good care of it. Abandoned buildings, abandoned factories, squares that are being not cared for, anything. And so we have 250 cities which have applied this, and we have 800,000 Italians today who are actively involved in maintaining and promoting commons. Now, I end with the Dutch example. This is very subtle, and this is still a difference between left and right, I think. There's a right-wing version of commoning and there's a left-wing version. I'm for the left-wing version, sorry. The right-wing version is the Dutch, where, Queen, I forgot her name, Juliana, no?
Maxima.
Oh, it's a new one. It's a new one. It was the previous one, the old one. So in 2005, the Dutch said, officially, this is the end of the welfare state, right? And in this kind of context, commoning means what the state doesn't do, please go ahead, right? So it's kind of inserted in a neoliberal politics. So yes, civil society is promoted, but here's the problem. If, let's say you are poor, in a poor neighborhood in Rotterdam. Okay, save your library, yes. Save your swimming pool, yes. But then the third thing that needs to be saved, people are exhausted. Right, so it doesn't work. And the same big society was the same idea. The idea is to, they closed down 2/3 of public libraries in the UK, right? And maybe 15% of them are now in the hands of the people. So when I say the state is scaling, it's very important. When the workers were doing their own social security, only 20% of the population had it, right? It's the welfare state which said this is a right for everybody. So they scaled it up from 20 to 100%. They made it to a right. So bottom up is nice, but it basically also creates other inequalities because, so commoning requires time. If I'm well educated, and maybe I don't have to work so much, I have time that I can spend. If I have 2 jobs to survive, it becomes a challenge, right? So then you have kind of hipster commons that the work for the better educated, and then you have religious and ethnic commons which work for the poor. but they're not in dialogue, and they not have the same quality of resources that they can access.
Thank you very much, Michel. Thank you very much for sharing this very, very insightful information with us. So please applause for Michel, who is exceptionally here with us. So we will continue the conversation, and for this I would like to invite Anna Melenchuk, who is a co-founder of the Institute of Innovative Governance and the European Digital Development Alliance. Anna is very active and she is involved in many projects regarding openness of democracy, and today she'll speak about e-women and safer access to e-democracy.
Yes, sorry, just preparing with
No
the
worries.
microphone. Oh yes, perfect. Thank you. Okay. No, sorry, this will not do.
So this is
No, this way. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I prepared some Slido questions for you, but since we are quite a small group, I think I will ask you the questions very shortly as we speak. So my presentation will be very practical. So we are moving from the theory to the practice and to some very concrete examples on how all of those decentralized, distributed projects can be applied in the real life on the local level. So the first question from me to you will be, who knows which city is this, where these buses are? They exist probably in many countries, but maybe you can guess. Also looking at me, maybe you can guess where I'm from. So Balkan, yeah, it's quite close. Close, but it's more Eastern Europe. But same problems. Romania, more Eastern. Bit up. It's Ukraine. It's Ukraine, and the city is called Lviv. This is the city where I come from. Yeah, unfortunately, in many Eastern European countries, but also in Western Balkans, was a good example. There are still all of those horrible buses, which are very dangerous for citizens. They are just full. It's impossible to use them. They have been there since '90s, and there is no reform going on in the public transportation. So what I did a few years ago, I'm not myself a public transport expert. I've never studied urbanism or anything related to transport. I had no idea how to change that, but I saw that there is a problem, and I was very angry about those buses. I really didn't like them, and I was thinking for quite a long time what I can do about that. And then I learned that in my city, the system of e-petitioning exists, where basically any citizen can write an e-petition, which if you get enough votes from other citizens, this petition directly goes to the local government, and if you're lucky, if your petition is good, local government will approve it, and your idea, your reform which you're suggesting can be successful. So this is basically what I did. I created a nice e-petition. I consulted with many experts on public transport. I did my research. Then I made this e-petition online. This is how the petition actually looked like. In my city, we have 1 million people, so it's quite a big city. But to get enough votes, you need to get, I think 500 votes. It's very little for 1 million people. Only 500 votes to get your petition being approved by the local government. So it was quite easy to do. You write your e-petition, you put it on the website, you do a nice social media campaign. You can also do a traditional media campaign, but actually to get 500 votes is not so much work. If your petition is good, if it really speaks to the people, if it's about real problems, you can get those votes pretty easy. I got my 687 votes in less than 1 week, just putting that into social media. Then lots of traditional media picked it up because it was quite a bold decision. Of course, the local government doesn't have any money. How can we get rid of those yellow buses? But everyone felt that there is a problem, and here there is this petition. people are calling for this reform. People decided to support it. But since I did a good research, I consulted with experts, I also suggested some ways on how to get money for the reform of the public transport. And in the end, since there was quite a push from the society, so many media wrote about that, local government had no choice rather than to support the petition and find that money for the public transportation reform. So now in 2 years, we will need, the government will have to get rid of those buses and introduce eco-buses and trams. Only because of the e-petition, an initiative which I created with my fellow friends, colleagues, after consultation with some experts. And this is the example of how an initiative coming from ordinary citizens can work, can pressure governments and be successful. After that, together with my friends, we created an organization which aims to promote e-democracy and e-government, because this e-petitioning system is a very good example, the concrete example of e-democracy in society, and this is what we are doing until this point. Just maybe to introduce you to some of our projects, we created the Web Checker, the platform which analyzes online platforms according to the accessibility criteria that people with visual impairments can access platforms. So basically you just put the URL of the website, it gives you the recommendation how to improve your website. Then we created a bot, which is again the platform which connects citizens with members of the European Parliament. So basically you ask a question to something about the European Union, and this bot connects you to the Member of Parliament in order to solve any issue you have, help you to solve the issue which you may have, to bring it to the attention of the European Parliament. And the last project which we have, oh sorry, I need to go back, is called eWomen, and this is the project which I'm going to speak about today a bit more. It's about boosting political participation of women through digital tools. But first, let's look maybe a bit more into what is e-democracy, what is this phenomenon about. E-democracy is the use of ICTs, information and communication technologies, for political processes. It can also be called digital democracy, digital politics. I'm sure you heard many different ways of calling e-democracy, but this one's probably one of the most popular ones. It's often interchangeably used with e-government, but e-government is more about digitalizing public services rather than involving people into e-participation and democratic processes. The necessary prerequisite of e-democracy is digital inclusion, meaning that all vulnerable groups, all people within the society are able to participate in those new technological transformations which are helping to improve our democracy. One of those vulnerable groups are unfortunately still women, which is even bigger, half of the population. Women, unfortunately, today are less present in tech. They lack digital skills. Women participate in politics much less than men, and lower participation, of course, means lower representation. Women still tend to be employed in informal economy, taking part-time and precarious jobs. Gender pay gap is very significant. So basically, for the same amount of work, women are paid less than men. Maybe you know what is the gender pay gap here in the European Union? Any guesses? It's quite significant. It's 16% in countries in Eastern Europe, which are members of European Union. I'm not even speaking about Ukraine, Belarus, and countries where I come from. It's more than 30%. So basically, for the same work, women get less paid. As an example of lower representation in politics, yeah, you may see with yourself how many leaders of states today are women. Maybe you even know the number, how many states of leaders of the states are women today in the world. We have more than 193 states, I think, and only, maybe someone else, 21 leaders of states are women, comparing to the number of states we have. So this is a big problem. Why is it happening? It is mainly due to some traditional roles of women in which women play in society as guardians of families, children, etc. Women are also victims of majority of gender-based violence cases. So lots of problems which women today are suffering from. So how to include women into political processes and why politics is not working for women. Women still vote less than men in Europe. Only 40% at the recent European elections women participated at this rate at the EU elections. Why it's not working? Firstly, it's confidence. Women don't feel confident enough when it comes to elections, when it comes to running political campaigns. Women usually have less financial resources to run the political campaign. They have less time because of the absence of gender-responsive public services, which would help women to take some burden of this child care and paid care labor, which they're entitled to within their families in these traditional values of society, which is probably everywhere in the world. And of course the cultural issue, the glass ceiling, because men tend to hire men, and for women it's much harder to get into politics since men are still there and they tend to support other men. So is digital participation an answer? Yes and no. From one hand, those traditional barriers which I've spoken about are still there, and it's hard to challenge them, even though there are so many initiatives and some positive changes happening. We see more and more women getting into politics. We see more and more women getting more economically also empowered, but it's still a huge, massive challenge. So for some women, in terms of political participation, being digitally engaged, participating in e-democracy, e-petitioning tools can be an answer into getting into politics. So what this digital participation or e-participation, e-democracy is offering is firstly the confidence. Since you can suggest petitions, participate in e-budgeting, for example, by being anonymous. You definitely don't need much resources to participate in those platforms. You don't need to invest any time any money into that. Only if you would like to have a nice social media campaign or organize an event, maybe. But it's not comparable to running a real political campaign. I mean, in the representative democracy. Then it requires much less time. Yes, you do your research to suggest a nice e-budget project or a nice e-petition, but it's still much less time as it's required for traditional participating in governments, being a member of parliament, for example, etc., where women unfortunately don't have time because of the issues which I mentioned to you. And then culture, within those digital platforms there are no glass ceilings. So women can easily participate there as that traditional glass ceiling is not there. But there are a few risks. Digital participation, and this is also can be equivalent also to men. It's not only about women. Digital participation can lead to slacktivism. Maybe you heard about this term. Is that slacktivism is when people are participating too much in digital democracy, in e-democracy. So they're, for example, commenting some posts on Facebook of political leaders. They are voting for some e-petitions, suggesting maybe voting for some e-budget initiatives. But then when the time comes to go and vote, when there are elections happening, they just don't do that because they feel like, okay, I'm already invested so much time into this politics, I don't have any more desire to go and vote. So when the most important time to participate in the representative democracy comes, they just don't do it. So this is one of the risks of the digital participation. I'm not speaking about women here, it's about everyone. Another risk is that there was a research on Change.org by Harvard University, where they compared, analyzed how women are participating in signing or initiating petitions, and they saw that basically Change.org just repeated the same system as we have in traditional representation democracy. Women were participating more in a thinner way rather than in a thicker way, so they were voting rather than initiating petitions. Same as it's happening now with elections. Women, yes, they vote, but they usually don't run for campaigns. These are the biggest risks. But however, in my opinion, in the opinion of the team which I'm working with in the Institute of Innovative Governments, we believe that those benefits which I mentioned outweigh the risks, and that's why we created a platform which is called eWomen, through which we are engaging women into participating in e-democracy. Within this platform, which is now online in some Eastern European states, in Ukraine and Estonia and Belgium, we are also trying to set it on. We just have some little issue with registration, but I hope to solve it very soon. It's a new initiative. Women can go online, suggest petitions, any decisions regarding local or national governance, and local and national governments will have to look into those initiatives which they are suggesting. The platform is powered by blockchain, which ensures the safety of the platform. Why we decided to go with the blockchain? Because we believe that safety is key. We made the research. We were surveying many women about participating in e-democracy tools, and what we often heard from them, what was the biggest challenge, why they were not active in e-democracy platforms such as Change.org, for example, is that they were not feeling safe about their personal data, since many issues they would like to suggest for e-petitioning were of sensitive issues sometimes, such as related to sexist advertising, gender-based violence, something what would trigger bad reactions from men or even other women. So they were feeling not secure and safe enough to put on their data on such big platforms as Change.org, on other platforms which exist in countries members of the EU. So safety was for us key, and then we decided to go with the blockchain, which helps us to ensure the anonymity option. So when women are registering in the platform, they may opt for anonymity, and we will keep their data safe. It's just much harder to hack, to get into the blockchain system rather than an ordinary platform. That's why we decided to go with the blockchain to secure the personal data of our users. Why specific platform for women, you would ask, even though I gave maybe many examples of why women should be empowered a bit more into politics. We believe that we believe it's important to have a platform specifically for women, not a general platform, as this platform may serve also as a community enabler. Few women who will register will involve other women, create a community, support each other, see what works, what doesn't work, and this is what we already tried in Ukraine and Estonia, and it worked pretty well. However, at the same time, our platform is not only for women. Men can also register there and suggest their petitions, but we are targeting women first of all in order to get them more politically engaged. Together with Lidiana, we applied for a Horizon grant recently from the European Commission, and we hope to spread this platform in all EU member states. And in December we will have our results. I hope that they will be successful. So yes, also in the Institute of Innovative Governance, we are creating the association of organizations working on social innovations, e-governance, and e-democracy. So if you are interested to work with us, please feel free to contact me or Liliana. We have just been set up. We don't have any membership fees. Our goal is to reduce digital divide, both in the EU but also outside the EU. We produce research, briefings, newsletters, connect many organizations, universities, and facilitate the access to the EU funding, as we've done with the eWomen project. And yes, I've been very short. These are all the links, and I will send my presentation to you, that you can take a look at our recent projects and specifically eWomen platform. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you also for taking into account the time constraint. So I would like to open the floor for any questions. And again, please think about that. We're a little bit behind, so
yes, sure.
Please. Just we'll get you a mic.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. My question is, by coincidence, I am a social entrepreneur coming from the gender field. I have worked extensively in Asia and in the Middle East, in the field itself, on large funded bilateral women projects. Yeah. So I know where you're coming from. For me, this is quite old school. Maybe for me as a suggestion, because I was really embraced by gender and empowerment and all of that, and I thought that's the way forward. We are 20 years later. The narrative has been hijacked, as you know. Meanwhile, the development goals went from 10 till 12 till now 20 and so on, or 21. What I feel is that just focusing on women is not the way forward, especially if we want to actually embrace a common narrative. Mm-hmm. I understand it. I still push women forward, but I think you have to find a common ground. Engendering it is actually leaving a lot of men out. Now, the funny thing is, in my projects, the best people pushing forward the women's agenda were men, not women. So you might want to broaden it in order, because this is quite EU, and that's the problem with EU-funded projects, is that you have to work within that narrative, which is not, it's actually opposite of what we're trying to do in commons and scaling and, working for the common good. I hope you can put it somewhere in there. And take it forward, because that's my experience over 20 years, that the gender narrative doesn't work only anymore. You have to find a common ground for everybody to work and push that forward.
Yeah, thanks for the idea. Definitely agree with you. That's why we decided to keep the platform open also for men. It's not solely for women. It's just we are raising awareness on the issues of which women are unfortunately suffering from today. But yes, we will keep the platform open for men. We will also try to raise awareness about those women issues among men and invite them to register petitions or any ideas which they have into the platform. And yeah, thanks for your suggestion. We will definitely keep it on board. Yep.
So do we have time for one more question?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I even wonder how you're going to enforce it, and it should be the fact that you're digitally present makes that gender doesn't matter, nor does race, nor does anything. That is even an advantage, let's say, to have everybody digitally on board. Yeah.
Yes, that's the idea. We will make sure that men are also aware about the platform, about the issues which women have, and invite them to be a part of it. Exactly. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I was informed that our next speaker, Paula, she will not be able to join us because she's unwell. So what I suggest is we have a 5 minutes break, no, not longer, for a coffee. We come back and we continue with the panel on intellectual property for collaboration.
This is Rusty from Some FM. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's supported Some FM in the past with your t-shirt purchases and your monthly payment plans. Those really help us out a lot. So thank you again for supporting Some FM. We couldn't do this if it wasn't for you.
You're listening to Groove Salad, ambient beats and grooves from SomaFM.com.
each of them. So Elena and Reina are founders of Starks. They're experts on intellectual property and lawyers. Alain, he will be joining us later online, and yes, he's joining us right now. He's also a lawyer and a professor. He created a global standard for intellectual property, CREA-free. Then Dick is supporting Alain to create the team to build CREA-free on Holochain and to make the web platform a reality. So thank you all for joining, and the panel will be moderated by Philippe.
So in order to organize ourselves for this panel and to keep it as interactive as possible, there will be like in relay sport, there will be a baton, and the baton is a microphone. Yeah. So when you're ready to take on the baton, you raise your hand, and if I see it on time, I will pass you the microphone, because you have to remember that everything that is recorded, and if there is no microphone, there's no point of talking because nobody hears you. Yeah. And that will also allow us, our friend who is online. Is he online now? Can we hear his voice somewhere? That he raises his hand to for the to. Alain, I can see you in the little dot, but I don't hear you because you don't speak.
Can you share your camera, Alain?
He doesn't hear us. Okay, for the moment, the questions I've received until now are questions who are very highly technically, legally oriented. Yeah? I know it's perfect for you, but it makes my life a bit more difficult. Can you hear us? Can you hear us, Alain? Yes, I do. That's excellent. It's like talking to my father in the other world. We are going to try to give you as much talking time as the other participants, Alain. So we will just talk whenever you have to make a sound when you want to talk. What I was saying is that looking at the question I received, those questions were very legally IP oriented. And to start off, I would like to broaden a little bit the topic, because we had two excellent presentations who were presentation of Michel, who was completely opening the roof of the and very, very broad starting with the Romans and things like that. And then if we can have one question on that topic of commons. Yeah, we saw that Michel was talking a lot on commons, and I would like to see if with you if we can agree on what can we put into commons. What do you put in common as a first question, and then as a second question for somebody else, we will ask the question is, how do you make sure that that you feel safe with what you put in the common? And that will be more the governance part. Yeah, and then that's where we will bounce back to your IP story. Okay, so I would like one of the panel members to define maybe 3 or even 4 elements that can be introduced as a common thing. So how would you define commons, and what are the different categories?
I think it should be good that you guys explain how it is actually, how common people in common can protect their intellectual property as it is right now, And then I would answer how the Korea Free Standard, the new standard from Professor Alain, brings a solution to the problems we face right now with intellectual properties. And my guess, I don't know, you're an expert on that, my guess is that actually the intellectual property doesn't give a guarantee or a good solution for the man in the street or for even common to secure the intellectual properties and to build out to a much higher level like a patent.
So let's agree on the rules here. I ask the question, the person who takes the phone, the microphone, answer the questions. There is no point of bouncing off another question to the question that I... It's on a Sunday, okay? So
can I give a direct answer to this question?
Yes, of course.
So the principle today is that ideas are of free use. So is common. This is an idea launched by President of the United States, President Jefferson, some centuries ago. And this is something we need to change. And this is the problem you've raised today, cooperate at scale.
Right, but we are on one level above that, because we are talking about, we had a whole presentation on commons, and in the presentation of commons, what I want to hear is that in a community, you can add more than just ideas. And I would like to start from really the meta level, saying what are the things that we can put in common to build something.
Yes, thank you. I think that you actually want to know exactly what can we put in common, what can we co-create in common, such as software, for example, or maybe furnishings, or books, or anything else. So not only ideas, but the form which an idea takes in reality, which can be software, which can be books, which can be films, which can be art of any kind. So that is the basis. I assume that is where we start. And then of course the next step will be how to co-create and what protection is actually given to such co-creations, and how can we further develop or brainstorm about where the weaknesses of the current legal framework are, and how to solve them. Right. Yeah, I think that is, yeah.
We have the answer.
Yeah, well, the answer is exactly what I said first. So what is in common? Let's say, for example, software. Okay. Yeah. Else? Well, the answer I already gave was any ID, any concrete form of an ID.
Anything else?
No, because that covers everything.
What about money?
Which is a form of an ID. Hmm?
What about a car?
Which is a form of an ID.
Okay. That's one interesting point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Any other point of views?
No.
Okay.
Yes, may I add something, please? May I add something on this question? May I add something?
Please, can you not add a question, but answer to the original question, saying what are the different elements that we can put in common?
Could I answer to this question?
Yes, of course, you're welcome.
Okay. So there are three things that may be in commons. The first thing is the old inheritage of mankind. This, as a rule, if it's over 50 or 70 years after the death of the creator of the idea, it is part of the inheritage of humanity. The second thing we can have in common is what the state expropriate. Because in the general interest of the community, certain private things may be expropriated by the state because it's for a common utility. And the third source of common things are the creation made by creators, which creators decide to put in common, medicine or whatever. They think that it's a gift they give to humanity.
That's excellent. That's already a broader definition that we were looking for. Within, I see that Michel has something to add. Is it okay if I pass on the microphone to Michel if we ask him to not to talk more than 15 seconds?
So I would put the main difference between immaterial and material. So basically, if you're in the immaterial fields, knowledge, software, design, we call it anti-rival goods. That means that the more you share, the richer you are. If I sing your song has more value. And so this is one thing. And so basically, if you are sharing immaterial things, you don't really need to worry about theft, in my view. Okay. So we can discuss this, but this is what I'm thinking. Okay. Second, material things, and in material things you need reciprocity, because they get exhausted, they're rare, and so the property regime, the common property regime, is going to be very different, whether you deal with immaterial or material resources.
Thank you. We're getting there. We are getting there. So, to continue this debate, and so should we focus on the immaterial side of things then? Yeah, of course. That's what I imagine. Can you explain to us what are? Michel goes very completely extreme, saying immaterial things should not be protected in a way, should be free, accessible to anyone. Contradict me if I'm wrong. And free to use. What is happening today? What is the current way of doing things concerning immaterial things?
Well, in fact, and I can surprise you, but the basic rule is that copying is free, unless there are exceptions. And exceptions are made, for example, by intellectual property law. Okay, thank you, Liliana. So copying is free, but intellectual property law, on the other hand, is an exception to that general rule. And the basic reason or why is intellectual property law important? It is to give someone, natural person or an entity or a group of persons, an exclusive right on their ID, their intellectual ID, what they created for, most of the times, a limited period in time. For example, patents, they cover inventions, technological inventions, for a period of 20 years, as from deposit of the patent request. So that is the current legal framework. You have patents, you have trademarks, you have copyrights. All came into existence more than a century ago. But of course I can fill a whole day in speaking about the intellectual property rights. I think, but it's not my duty to reform your question, but where we go to is what are the weaknesses of the current legal framework and how to develop it.
Excellent. Yes. So let's answer this question then. So, so what are the weaknesses? Do we have any point of view on that?
And can I make this answer with some precision on this matter?
Yes, please,
It's
Professor.
a very, very dangerous answer because it's the state that exists today. Copying is free, and this copying is free, is destructive, and it puts the reign of money over everything, and profit and money. Copying is not free. Creative ideas should be protected. Leonardo da Vinci designed totally the bicycle. It took 4 or 5 centuries to make it. Gutenberg had to borrow a lot of money to make his printing machine. Copying was free, so once he's made his first Bible, he could not get back the money he had invested, and he was broke and he was ruined. And in most cases, creators today, startups, cannot act. They have creative ideas, but they cannot develop them because copying is free. So nobody wants to lend them any money.
Okay, that's a very clear point of view. Can we move back to the weaknesses today on getting your creative idea protected?
Yeah, there are some weaknesses. For example, if you have, as a startup, you have an idea and you want to put it on the market, then it takes some time to do it and you have no money. So yeah, you are you are organizing this pitches, trying to find investors, and then you have to tell what is your idea about. But at that point of view, this idea is not protected by nothing because ideas are free and copying is free. So there is some problem that some unfair entrepreneurs may just steal the ideas. And okay, if I if I see what Michel is saying, this is mindset of a capitalism, that you have to earn money with your idea, not as common like you explained, but this is the reality of today. So, for example, if you want to patent it, it will take you up to 5 years to do it, and also it costs a lot of money. So that's why it is important to have some things, and there are now some things, even if they are not like waterproof, to protect your idea from the beginning. And there are some things, legal things, but there are some other things also.
I know. We'll get back to that. So you just mentioned that there were a few elements, or there are some things that will help creators and people with great ideas to put their ideas safe for a while. So what are those ideas, and what are those concepts that will allow to protect them?
Well, the technology today with blockchain, one of the most interesting use cases for blockchain has, everyone knows, putting the intellectual properties on the blockchain. Now, you can do that on several ways, and I think, and that's the reason why I get in contact with Professor Alain Soloumiac, is because he created a standard that is open to everyone, giving you the freedom to protect your idea, not to patent it in the start, for very low money. So putting your idea on the blockchain, have it time-stamped on the blockchain, and then working to a certain level of standard from CREA-free. CREA-free standard has 5 levels, and it starts with just noting down your idea on a format of a document. Once you have this documented with pictures or with whatever you think it's needed to document in your invention or your creation, you can put it on the blockchain. From then on, you have the second step where we will ask experts to look on this document and to verify that it's standard it's following the standard of Creafree. Now, the standard of Creafree has different elements, different parts that protects the inventor to give the right information that a court of somebody who would take you to justice would ask to you, which is for a part in the patents, which is in the part in the copyright, because you're protected, but you only can use this protection if you're attacked or you're copied by anyone else. So you have to defend yourself. That's the basic idea of Creafree, is that you need a solid document, a solid proof of your intellectual properties. The third part is the economical evaluation, always by third parties, by experts, people who will evaluate your economic, your intellectual properties, and will allow you to go to a bank or into our system to get funds for your creation, to develop your startup idea, to develop your art or whatever you're doing. That's the third part. The fourth level in the Creafree standard is the originality, and that's very important because the originality is backed by at least 2 experts in the field of the creation. Means that those 2 experts will give their name to the Crea book. Remember the note down of your creation, we call that a Crea book. It's reading like a book. It explains in detail how you came to that idea, how you're going to develop it, what is the potential economic value of it, if you want to apply for an economic aid from a bank or a financial institution. So all those things are present in the Crea book, and it will give the possibility to have the originality checked by those experts. And then you have the 5th level in the Crea book, which is the authenticity. The authenticity of the Crea book, of your intellectual property, is also very important. It's the final version. And all that is combined with a certain standard, like, for instance, your intellectual property must be ethical. Otherwise, you will never have the originality label from the Crea book, which is, let's say, a protection that we only support creations that are ethical. And I think that's the most, in a simple way, explained how the standard is. And it covers the points of patents, it covers the points of copyrights, and it also covers the points of trademarks. And that's why I think, well, if you have more questions about it in depth, you should ask the professor, of course.
I know the professor has prepared one slide. Is that correct, Professor?
Yes, I have 2 slides eventually to comment. To say that the general principle, we are thinking of the new society in which we are now, and we are thinking about the poor startups which are going to butchery, that is, which are writing their white book, which have plenty of troubles, and when they have a good idea, it is seized by a big group. So no copying creative idea is not free. Copying creative idea is stealing, pure stealing. Since the 18th century, we have entered in a state of right. That is, human rights are protected. And the first human right, if he is not a slave, he owns his work. And this work is the labor work or the creative work. So creative works are not of free use. If somebody works months, years on developing a new creation, it does not belong to everybody. It belongs to the guy who made it. And this is written in many international treaties that exist today. And one of them is taken from the Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it's mandatory in most the states, existing states. And it says here very clearly that the state parties to the present covenant recognize the right of everyone to benefit from the protection of the moral and material interest resulting from any scientific, literary, artistic production of which he is the author. It says, it recognizes to any creator the right on his creation. And this is the fact, this is the law. But the states have not implemented this law. That's the problem. But this law exists and everybody is protected by this international law.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a comment here from the panel.
Not just one comment. Two main comments. First of all, I hear Dick saying that the CREA free covers copyright, patents, and trademark rights. I do not at all agree. There's a huge difference between the three of them. For example, in copyright, the form a certain ID is given should be original. Legal question is, what is original? Original in copyright is that one has given expression of his personal view, his personal touch in a certain form of an ID, whether it is a book, whether it is a film, whether it is a insurance policy. That is originality in copyright. But in patent rights, we are talking about novelty, about inventive steps, and that is something completely different. Novelty means that the invention may not exist anywhere in the world, whether it has been published in a Brazilian magazine or in a German patent, it may not exist. Inventive step means that from the man or the person skilled in the art, the solution given by the patented subject, which should be an invention, is not common, is not easily to foresee. So there's a huge difference only on the level of what is called originality. In trademark rights, we do not know about originality. There should not be an earlier trademark registered. The subject of a trademark right is completely different of a copyright or a patent right. A trademark is a sign used in trade to identify the goods and services of a company. That is something completely different, a completely different purpose of what is protected by copyright. So I do not at all agree with how you mentioned it, Dick. And on the other hand, I heard a professor saying that rule referred to on the slide has not been implemented by the states. I do not agree at all. Copyright, the Convention of Berne, dates from 1886, which is more than a century ago. It protects moral rights of the authors. It protects their copyrights as well. It has been implemented. Further, the authors, they enjoy a very broad protection under Belgian and European law. So they are well protected, which is good. And then I come to the weaknesses of, for example, copyright. I think there are weaknesses and we should consider them. I think copyright is not.
Could I just discuss this first point and then we may go in the weaknesses if it's of interest of copyrights?
I think it's definitely of interest for copyright, but seeing how we are going into the details of what is right and what is not right.
I just need 1 minute.
Okay, let's do it in 1 minute then. We are listening.
Okay. Copyrights and patents are archaic prerogatives from the king that existed before the state of law. It is privilege given to subjects. That is the origin of patent and copyright. and patents of copyrights have been maintained after the system based on divine right of the king. They have been developed to block the freedom of the creators.
Okay, that's very clear. And then I have somebody who can do it in half minute here.
Sorry, but again, I do not agree. Why did patent rights, copyright, and other intellectual property rights came into existence? There's one main answer to that, and that is to stimulate innovation in society.
Excellent point. Okay, here we are. Stimulation of innovation. That's where we want to be, right? At this point, took us a while, but here we are on the idea of stimulating innovation. And let's bounce back on, or let's bounce forward on this idea. And we had I see two different ways of stimulating creativity. Is by putting brains in common, and I think here of IP Creative Commons, where Linux example we had earlier today, and the other one is one that might be used by Pfizer or GlaxoSmithKline, is by keeping, or the academics, it's by keeping the IP to them. Yeah. What I'm really interested here, because we are with a panel of experts, is to understand from the idea of having everything free to the idea to have something, some of it protected, and from that side of being protected, what part is in a Creative Commons idea and what part is in a more academic or GlaxoSmithKline type of this is mine and I'm not sharing it because I want to make money out of it. So from your experience, dear panel, if how much of the creation is completely free and not protected? How much of the creation is partly protected but put in common in Creative Commons, and how much is completely protected? Wild guess. Wild guess.
It's not my policy to reform your questions, but I think it's just it's the wrong question. I can't answer that question.
Okay, I can give an answer to this question. I can give an answer to this question.
We are listening.
Yes. Most of the creations are free and they come out of robbery, and most of the creators are anonymous. About 5 or 10% of wealth in the world is patented. There are very few patents in the world. There are many patents deposited, applied for, some 5 million, but there are very few international patents extended, something like 150,000. And all these patents belong to a few very big companies that owns the world wealth. All the world wealth is owned by a few person, a few company through this patent system.
Okay, that makes it very clear. And my area of interest is on the Creative Commons area. So I would like to motivate the panel to give some input on their experience using this Creative Common idea.
If I may, I think in the CreaBook standard there is a part where we think that collaboration between creators should be possible. And how this collaboration should work is by protecting, like the professor said, the original creator. The original creator can work with a team of other creators, but it remains the original creator. And I think that's the philosophy of CreaFree, is that we try to reach every creator to work together, to have perfect solutions to problems, be it environment, be it technology, by working together, but keeping a certain responsibility and certain rights on their creations. This can be done by smart contracts. This can be done by well, maybe not smart contracts, but certainly contracts between the creators when they start working together. I think this is the only way, and Crea3 would love to work with Holochain because we believe in the system where peer-to-peer would allow to communicate between creators without a centralized community. So Crea3 will only have one single creation register, and for the rest all services will be dependent and directly to the creators. And the creators can collaborate in peer-to-peer with each other. That's, I think, the way we will go with Crea3. And I think Holochain would be a complete answer to have this infrastructure put up, and also the idea of the money, which is the money Holochain implemented at this time, not Holo, but the new system, I think, mutual credit they call it. This is also very attractive, and I think that Crea3 should go down that path, and that is a possibility for the future. So I don't know if that's answered a little bit our future concerns of Crea3.
For me, when I hear it, it doesn't seem to be a very lean process. Yeah, protecting your idea, even if you put it in. Can you just reframe the two major problems with the idea of protecting an idea, and how we could make it leaner?
Of course, there are two big problems, two big challenges. From one point of view is that when we take a look on the framework, a legal framework of today, for example in Belgian law, all the rules are dealing with one author, for example, a person who is creating, but when we start to collaborate, then it gets really complicated. So we have a lot of judicial rights that are dealing with this problem, but it's not really it's not a law. We don't have some principles that are clear for people. This is one, and from the other point of view, what we mentioned already, that it takes a lot of time when you have an idea to protect this idea. So people starting to when people come to us, they ask, what should we do? When we have no money, we are a start-up and we have this brilliant idea, then we first look on the measures. What measures can you take to protect your idea before it gets legal? Because it's also important, and there are some unlegal or some measures that can be taken before you just protect this idea legally.
Okay. So how can we make it leaner? How can it go faster? I'm involved with a lot with startups, and when they come up to me with an idea, and they even suggest the idea of protecting it, I just tell them it's bullshit. There's no point of protecting an idea in my eyes, and please contradict me after that, because the importance here is not the idea, but it's the ability to execute, the ability to put it in practice, the ability to the process behind the original idea. So my main comment to them is don't spend your time and your money protecting your original idea. Spend your time on defining the process you are going to use to roll it out and to implement it. Is in the current IP legal protection, is the process of implementing it protected today?
Well, first of all, it all depends on what is the ID, what is the subject which needs protection, and then I come back to, because I have the impression that ID here in this discussion is narrowed to subject which can be patented. The process of executing an ID could enjoy protection under the current legal IP framework. Whether it is a method of producing something, it could be patented. Whether it results in, or if it results in a subject form, it could enjoy protection under copyright law. Further, copyright law provides protection as from the creation of anything. If there would be someone here drawing on a paper or making notes of this panel discussion, the result, that drawing or these notes already enjoy copyright protection at this actual moment. There is no registration needed. Problem later on will be on what date is it created and how will you prove it, because there is no registration. But we can't just talk about ideas. So in the case of startups,
you defined the whole panel as an idea. Remember that?
yeah. No, but what advice could we give to a startup is to analyze, to assess, okay, what is your idea, and how can we implement it within the current legislative framework. And from that basis we can see, okay, it is a potential ID which is, or product which is subject to a patent protection, or you should invest time in giving form to your ID by writing it down in a, I don't know, a business paper which can enjoy copyright protection. So it all depends on what did you create, and how software, for example, another thing is a specific protection.
When we talk about IP, actually IP law is something, a law that forbids copying. But as lawyers we try to protect people and to advise them to avoid these problems, because if you're talking, for example, about copyright, if you have some software, my colleague just say, okay, later on will be a problem to prove on what date it was created. But you don't, I think we have to avoid the situation when you have to prove when it was created. So first you have to do very good your homework. For example, if you have an idea, any idea, and you want to share it, if you go to, for example, to business angels or other investors, then you have to do your homework. Just have to look, okay, who is there sitting, who are the investors, who are interested parties, so that you, for example, ask other people that already work with them, or you just take a look on the internet to see what are these people, because there are good people, but there are some people who are unfair. So that is protection that goes before, it comes before the legal protection. Then if you work with some parties, you can just conclude a no disclosure agreement. This is also okay, it's already legal, but it's not really protection like from IP. It's just a contract, has actually not that much to do with IP. So these are measures that can be taken before you really go to IP protection. So this is the way to avoid these problems.
Okay, so that's concerning the startup side. What about ideas that come up with within the civic ideas around how to reorganize a government, or should that be protected, or how can we promote that collaboration? Is there something provided as a legal framework around these ideas, or should there be anything promoting it or restricting it? That's my question to you.
I think the Korea Book and Korea Free Standard offers a solution for that, because again, the Korea Book is a document where you can put all your intellectual thoughts. You don't have to have a product. You can simply have a thought or an answer for a big solution, like for environments or for a city problem, that you say, hey, I found a solution, I write it down, I put it on the Korea Book, and we registered it on the blockchain. So you have your timestamp, you have your time date, you can prove that you are the one who come up with that idea. Then the second part is that you can collaborate with other creators, then give you the answer about that. So I think the Korea Free Standard really gives an opportunity and an answer to work together, and to bring a new solution for every startup and everyone who has an idea, or everyone who wants to create something. This standard offers even to the general public. You don't have to be fortunate, because registering on the Korea Book on the blockchain only costs 50 euros with Korea Book, with Korea Free. So it's open for everyone to start to write down and to have your idea secured, protected. But again, I repeat what I said before: protection, okay, but then you need the lawyers in a certain way, because they need to defend yourself for that protection. What you are doing as a creator, you should document, and what you said before, you should analyze what you are creating. Put it down, as much information as you can, document as much as you can, so that your document, your Korea Book, is as full as possible. And I think from that step on, you can work with other people, you are secured, and you can go wherever you want to go as creator.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to round up this panel by thanking you all. Maybe the professor on the other side still has a word to wrap up the presentation.
Well, wrap up not, but maybe argue on the last item to say that IP or protection is bullshit, I think is a big mistake, which is usually repeated. And it's terrible to say that to startups which are facing constantly this problem, and they go to investors, and the investors says, what is your intellectual protection? What is your intellectual property? And they are facing this problem. And to have a patent or to have 5 patents is better. Covering the whole world cost about $100,000. So if you have $500,000 to invest, plus the team of lawyers for $4 or $5 million to defend your intellectual property, then with this system, you have an intellectual property. But this system only protects big companies, not startups.
I think that's a perfect summary of what it's all about, getting your IP protected. It's a game for big companies. It's a game of millions, and I would like to thank you very much for your participation. We still have some networking discussions going on. I was missing a bit the part of the Creative Commons and what's accessible to the people without any monies. And I would like to give a final word to Michel Bouwens to give us one hint on where the startups could go.
Well, I can say partly agree and partly disagree with the things I've heard. I just want to say a few things. When you actually study the relation between patents and innovation, the relation is inverse. The more patents a country has, the less innovative it is. And it introduces about a 20-year lag in innovation. So you look at all the technologies, you see a very rapid innovation rate. Then they're patented, and for about 20 years, almost nothing happens. And then it's de-patented, and you have rapid innovation. Look at 3D printing is a very good example of that process. And copyright doesn't work either. So in a country like France, you have 1,000 people who can live from copyright. So yes, we need to protect innovation, creativity, but the way it's done now, and I think the professor actually agreed with this, it's not working for everyone. It's a winner-take-all system. So what can we do? So what I propose is the copy fair principle, which is that you actually leave the innovation, open innovation, but you protect the commercialization. By the way, trademarks are a pretty good way to do that, because with trademarks you can protect process. I give the example of Arduino, which is a global economy around all these computer accessories and stuff. So what happened with Arduino was invented in Italy, and then it got copied massively in China, but with very low quality. And then they started insisting on the trademark and actually having a stamp on the motherboard, and that was an effective way to force then the Chinese also to heighten the quality. So I'm looking more actually at the organization of the entities working with the Creative Commons. For example, you have the fair share system in the UK, which I think is a pretty good model. It works with special shares for funders, founders, workers, and users. And for example, the founders get 12.5% of the shares, so they're recognized for all the work they've done to make it possible. But then they apply demurrage, which means a negative interest, so every 2 years 0.5% goes away. I think this is an ideal system because you get recompensed for all the effort you made, but you don't have a lifelong feudal right, to everything forever. Copyrights are now 90 years. What does that have to do with compensating the invention of the author? He's not getting anything from it. Even his family is not getting all these copyrights in the hands of big multinational companies. And it's a real drain on innovation. If you want to make a documentary on the 60s, I have a friend who tried to do this. It's like $3-4 million before even starting to have the right to use the material. So you can't do it unless you have a lot of money. Anyway, so this is my answer. Think about the entity which is going to work on top of the open innovation, and think how you protect the work of the people in that community. And I think, for example, if you look at patents, it works for 5 years. This has been studied. After that, it's useless. And I have so many friends in startups who spent a lot of money on patents, and they tell me all the same. If we had known, we wouldn't have done it. We would have, if we would have invested that money in our own practice innovation, we would have been so much further. And basically, they go broke because of the cost of the patent system. Don't forget, the best incubators get 1 out of 100 success. But that's only the best one, like Y Incubator. Most of the incubators have like 1 out of 1,000. Yeah, so this is the reality of startups. It's very, very low success rate. And patents are not going to help in that.
That's a very good word to finalize this panel. Thank you again for not agreeing with what I was saying, for opening this panel to further discussions. I think this is important, to agree to disagree, and to fight these ideas and to defend our point of view. And I really invite you to continue defending your point of view, and later on as this event is rounding up. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip, and thank you to our amazing lineup of panelists. For the final part of this meeting, I invite you right now to listen and look at the video made by our next speaker, Rafi C. And he is somebody very much involved with the Holochain. He will be joining us remotely after we watch the video to answer some of your questions about this topic. So let's see the video.
Hello, my name is Rafi, and I'm giving you a short introduction into the Holochain ecosystem. Let's start a bit with a background. In the early history of humanity, when we were still living as nomads or in smaller villages, we had quite a different way of communicating with each other. Because back then our tribes were so small enough that we were able to remember who we interacted with, who we can trust. And as societies grew bigger and more complex, our brains were simply too small to keep all the data kind of in our head. So we had to come up with different systems, and that's when a lot of the hierarchies grew, and systems around data and communication that we have today come basically from this shortcoming that we can only interact with a certain amount of people, but we're a global society of billions of people, so we need to manage that somehow. What Holochain is trying to do is build a system that enables this more natural communication that we had before in smaller groups to be ported into the digital space. So what is Holochain? It's a part framework and part protocol to build distributed applications. So let's dive a bit into what that means, the deeper characteristics. So one of the most important aspects is that Holochain is agent-centric. That means that each user is in control of his own identity, his own data, the user interface, and he can also bridge between different applications. Data is stored and validated, distributed in a peer-to-peer network. Every device on a network stores its own data plus a bit more of other participants. And similarly, every device validates its own data and the data it stores or interacts with, which makes Holochain into this kind of data integrity engine. One important part of this is that data is redundant on the network. That if a participant goes offline, that the data is then replaced, ported to another participant. That means, like in an extreme case where a network actually splits in half, for example, if one continent is cut off, that Holochain apps still work with the data they have, and when connection is reestablished, they actually grow back together and heal themselves. One other important mechanism is an immune system. So when you make an entry or you want to do a transaction, then you always check the rules and see if they are followed. If they're not, then you can sign a warrant against a person, against another actor, and kind of tell others that this person doesn't follow the rules. So something needs to be wrong with his Holochain, with his application installation. And with that, you can exclude people that are not following the rules of the system. One of the first points of interacting with a system, we call that the membrane, is that you create a way of people to enter into the system, into an application. So that can be how they can access the installation files, can be that they need a code they need to enter in the beginning to be able to join, which makes sense if you think of a company application that they use internally only for employees, or for a voting app in a nation. So Holochain is a framework and a protocol. That means you won't really see the Holochain part. What you will see is the holochain applications that are built. So each, we call them HAP, each HAP has its own validation rules, kind of like a smart contract. And each HAP then builds its own individual network. That means there is no one big holochain. It's everything is distributed really. Every application creates its own network. And another very important factor is that apps are interoperable. So if I have one app that makes a user profile and another app that stores user pictures, and then I have a third app that does posts, then I can combine those three apps together to build a Twitter or a Facebook, for example. So let's...
Ça s'est bien passé.
Look at the really important points of holochain. As I mentioned, there is no one big holochain. There are many holochains, one network per application. We have the user interface is separate from the holochain app. That means you can combine apps in one user interface. Each app is responsible for its own adequate security. For example, a Twitter application on holochain doesn't need the same security as a currency application or a voting application. So they are highly adaptable, but also a lot of responsibility lies with the app developers. Holochain apps are installed on local systems, and they are basically self-hosted and don't require external servers or any overhead cost, really. But the problem is they need to be installed. And maybe some people, they don't want to install applications on their device, or they can't, or for whatever reason. So the same people that build holochain, they also build one application or a pool of applications, actually, that they call Holo. And that is a distributed hosting app. It is storing the data of other apps. It's serving that data to web users via web address through a browser. And hosts that participate in this network, they actually earn HoloFuel. HoloFuel is a dynamic mutual credit cryptocurrency that facilitates hosting demand with device availability. So if you have a lot of demand for hosting, but not enough hosts, then the price per hosting will rise, and the incentive rises that more hosts can join the network and support them take on the load. Right now we don't have HoloFuel. Maybe you're familiar with HOT, which is the Holo token, and that's a ERC20 placeholder token that will eventually swap to HoloFuel once the beta network of HoloHost starts. Then we also have the devices, the HoloPorts. They are basically plug-and-play devices. They're storing the data locally, and you can just plug them in the electricity and internet, and then you need to set up an account and they work. They have an autopilot, so even not so technically savvy people can use a HoloPort. And they really do the computational work to serve those web apps to web users, so that they don't have to install holochain apps. But the whole Holo hosting part is optional, so you don't really need that. It's more like a bridge between the modern peer-to-peer distributed internet to the old browser-based, website-based internet. Now I want to introduce some projects that are building on holochain at the moment. I mean, there are more. You can find out more in the forum, or there is a YouTube video that you can search for that introduces, I think, 37 different applications. So one of the biggest is RedGrid. They are based in Australia, and they are building the Internet of Energy, like with the same system that is distributed, and every device connects to each other and talks directly to manage the energy network load. Then we have Junto. That's a social network pretty soon they're going to launch an alpha. We have hum.earth, that's a Medium-like blogging app. Then there is Sacred Capital, which is basically a reputation interchange. We have HoloREA, that is a app that takes care of the resource, agent, and events-based accounting system. So that can be used for many other applications as well that do some form of accounting. Maybe you've heard of Alliance Block. They are an investment platform. And there is also Orion Protocol, a trading platform. And of course there are more, but I don't really have the time or depth to go deeper into those systems. The thing about Holochain is that many end users probably won't know that it's running on Holochain. It's just an app or a program they install and it works. What's more important is the user interface. That's kind of the user part. Holochain is more interesting for developers to see how can they produce private applications and networks. Holochain really tries to become an unenclosable carrier. That means that governments or agencies or anyone, that no one really can even detect applications or shut them down. I could build an application for my friends and run it just with them, and no one would even know that there is a network running. For me, I think it's really useful to use it with communities. Yeah, to build tools to help communities grow and work together. Be that offline communities in a location, eco-villages, whatever, or to facilitate different eco-villages working together and supporting each other. It's really about that the people that want to work together, they find a good way to work together without needing to rely on external organizations like Google or Facebook that don't really take care of your data, but that you really are in control of your own data and the network. I hope that helped to give some impression into the ecosystem of Holochain, and I encourage you that if you're interested into developing or more details, that you go to developer.holochain.org. There you can find tutorials of how to install and build Holochain apps, and also really good explanations of the core concepts, how Holochain and the architecture is really working. I'm really open to your questions now. Thank you.
In touch with Rafi live. How about now? Can you hear me? No.
Nothing, sorry. Okay. Yep. Yeah. No. Yes. Yes.
Okay, so just to let you know where we are at, we just looked at the video that you registered for us with the introduction on Holochain. So now I'm gonna open the floor to questions from the audience and see what are their interests in Holochain and how curious they are to learn more about it.
So anyone, a question? Yeah.
Hello, yeah, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I have a question basically on how you intend to scale with such a system, because it seems to me like a whole new IT world, and it won't be easy to mix up with, to onboard existing and integrate with existing initiatives.
Yeah, there are many ways to scale. So, like in itself, the technology is infinitely scalable because, unlike with blockchain, you don't have one part where every data is stored. It's all distributed on the network, and because also every application is its own network, you don't get bottlenecks, even if there are a million or a billion apps running. So basically, the bottleneck will be the internet infrastructure, the structure that's actually connecting the devices. Holochain pretty much takes care of the data layer, and that means you can even use existing user interfaces and just swap out the data layer in the background. So that's one chance for projects to switch to Holochain. And we already have quite a few projects that are working with Holochain. And what it takes in my mind now is that it just will take time for them to show what they can do and for the system to get accepted and adapted. I think this kind of technology, because it's self-carrying and doesn't really, like at the core, use a kind of carrying cost that you don't need to rent servers or anything, or need infrastructure really, because it's running on the devices of the user. I think, adoption is just a kind of question of time, how long it will take.
Thank you.
Question over there in the back, one in the second one.
Interesting technology. What I still find a little bit confusing, if you're working, it's a two-part question. If you're working with a lot of sensors where you're collecting IoT data, how can I securely transfer that information if I'm collecting basically information on a car engine and I'm using a low energy Bluetooth, for example, to send that data to the cloud? How easily can I basically adapt my application in order to do this using Holochain technology?
I think that should be very easy. Basically, every device that's connected on the network is one agent that has then the ability to write into the kind of distributed cloud. So what you need to do is basically put a small part of a Holochain application onto the IoT device, and then it can just send the data and share it. Yeah, yeah. Between tech chain. I'm not really familiar with that technology, sorry.
unlike scaling Holochain, how far along are you with
Yeah, so right now, just a few weeks back, or a month around, I think, a networking layer was published that for the first time since Holochain switched to develop on Rust, which is a interesting development language, more secure and faster than what they were using before. But it took a long time to switch, basically. So for the first time since they built on Rust, they actually are able now to build applications that can connect over the internet directly to all the devices. And so in a sense, right now it's starting to be scalable, but it's still working with a central point in the middle that's facilitating the connections between the devices. And they are planning to switch that out with a decentralized part, like in many steps. What that central point enables to do right now is that they can test the network and see, basically find a way to really build up a reliable connection and networking layer, which is basically the most important part and also the most difficult, because there are so many different devices that firewalls and stuff that it needs to penetrate. So that means with that central point right now, we can Holochain can ship the holoports they developed. They promised to ship them by the end of the year, and with that they are launching into open alpha, where more people can participate, and they can actually start with a test fuel. That is all in preparation of HoloFuel and the beta launch, which is where, but from the time perspective, like when exactly that will be, it's a bit difficult to say. Could be a few months, could be a year, I don't know.
the HoloFuel works and so on, so that it becomes more self-sustaining? Because right now it is a centralized project that needs to, like, you guys need to pay for the developers. You need to be able to sustain yourselves.
Yeah, we had quite in Holochain had quite a big ICO like in spring last year. So they are funded for at least 4 more years, I think.
No. Okay, Rafi, is it anything else that you would like to share with us? Oh, here I have a couple of hands. Okay. I'll start there, and we'll go then to the next one.
From the application that you showed, well, I'm looking at the data that you're dealing with. Are the applications always about connecting to other people, or so is it the main purpose to have a connected network, or can I have applications that just work for me? And
I mean, the purpose of Holochain is to have connected networks, but there is one example, like at the last hackathon in Prague, there was one group that developed a password manager with the idea that you install a network only for your devices, and that has a unique kind of network only for yourself.
Okay, yeah, interested in that. And the other question is, how do you measure, I don't know, success of an application? Or does it matter? Does it not matter at all? Because if I create an application that maybe works with you and me together and we are happy, that's a great application. We're very successful for that. But
Yeah.
investors won't be happy probably. Or is there a way to measure that, or you don't want to measure that?
No, it doesn't really make sense because there will be so many different kinds of applications, small ones, big ones. So I think as long as one person finds it useful, then it's a success for me. And I mean, no one really cares or bothers if it's useful only for you. Unlike with certain services, for example, that Google shut down because there were not enough users on it. So yeah, success, I think, is really a relative thing, and you can't really put a number on that.
Okay, now we will move to another question.
Okay, I hope my question makes sense because I'm not so tech savvy and I don't understand all the details. But I've heard of several initiatives that are trying to accomplish this decentralized web. You have one with the Belgian leg, Threefold, you have some others. Is Holochain designed in a way that it's interoperable in some ways with these other networks? Do you look at it? Do you work on it? And then secondly, you talked about, as I understand it, the technical capacity to scale, but you also need the social capacity to scale, like going in partnerships with big communities that benefit from your solution and vice versa. Voilà. That's my question.
Yeah. So, sorry, I lost it a bit, the question.
So I'll repeat. First item was, did you look at the interoperability with other networks?
Yeah, right.
And the other one
right.
is about like the social scalability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Holochain apps are like by the default interoperable among themselves, which is part of what I mentioned. And I think with the same way, you can also interoperate with other softwares and systems, basically by building an API. Because Holochain is really the data layer. And so on top, you could build a software that you install on your computer. It could be a browser, like something, a user interface that's running in the browser, or it could be something completely different that's just accessing the data in the Holochain app, basically. So for scalability, like social scalability, I think the limiting factor, at least in the early time, is that we need a lot of developers that are able to build Holochain apps, which is what we're doing right now in the community by organizing development camps, kind of a course where you can learn the basics of app development. We'll start one in January if you're interested. And we're also organizing a lot of hackathons where you can learn coding with the team by themselves, which will help with the scalability part. So for me, and I'm working with local communities here in Zurich, Switzerland as well. And for me, it makes a lot of sense to use apps built on Holochain because we don't need the server infrastructure or don't need to rely on a central organization, like Google, even though they have such handy tools like Google Drive and documents that you can work together. So I really hope that at some point we get the same kind of applications running on Holochain.
Okay, great. Another question here.
Can you explain how identity works on Holochain? Do you support decentralized identifier like the DID standard by the working group, W3C working group, or do you have your own definition, or I don't know?
I mean, that's up to the app developers, what they want to implement. But we do have like Holochain is building a deep key application, they call it, and where you can manage your different keys for different applications so that they trace back to one kind of source key or a seed key, which also means that if you lose one key, then you can basically recover or reclaim your account. or you could set up that you need 5 of your 10 friends to agree, and they can then restore a key, for example, if you lose everything. That's one application that we're building. And another one is personas, where you can have different identities that, for example, one identity would be just a username and a picture. Another one might be my whole name with an address and everything. And the different idea is that the data is stored on my device. And so if I want to go to a shop, an online shop, and order something, right now I have to create an account basically and give them everything. With Holochain, how it would work is that I would give them access to use my data when I'm ordering for them to print the stuff. So they would not need to kind of store my data, but they could access it at one time from my identity.
Okay.
Which also makes it interesting when I move. Then I can just change the identity in my application, and it would always be everywhere, kind of up to date.
Any other questions? Okay.
Yeah, so, can I ask another question?
Yes, please.
So I'm working at the moment with Blockstack, and it looks like it kind of in a similar or it has the same goals, but it comes from similar directions. So I'm thinking how it works together, or yeah, but I don't know. Can you kind of comment on a comparison, or do you know Blockstack?
Not really. I'm really focused on Holochain. I'm not really familiar with many other projects beyond Bitcoin or Ethereum. Sorry.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, I guess we reached the end of our discussion in the event today. So thank you, Rafi, for joining us and answering the questions. Thank you all
for having me.
for coming, and thank you to especially to the speakers who took from their Sunday to be here with us. Thank you to Liliana, who made such an effort to organize all of this, and to Digitizer for hosting. Lily, would you have any other final words to share?
Well, my final words are that I'm going to keep on organizing events and bringing this to everyone. So this is just the beginning.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we invite you now for a small networking session if you would still like to hang around for a while. Otherwise, thank you for coming, and enjoy your Sundays.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Yeah. Thank you very much for coming, for your input. Yeah. Thank you very much, Rafi. Yeah, enjoy your Sunday. Shut up.
Thank you so much for the invite. It was really nice. And